just wanna talk about some books. Hey, I just wanna talk about some books. Talk about some books. Talk about some books. Hey, I just wanna talk about some books with you.
Hey everybody, I'm Jo,
And I'm JoJo, and this is Canonical Nonsense.
and we are just two average Joes reading books.
And today we are going to talk about Dragon Prince by Melanie Rawn.
So, just for some background on this book, it was published in 1988 and is the first in a trilogy that goes by the same name. It goes by Dragon Prince. There is also a Dragon Star series that is based in the same world. I do want to mention that this is not the same story as the Netflix kids show Dragon Prince.
Very different.
If you are expecting a kids friendly book, look somewhere else because this book is absolutely not child friendly. So if your kids are listening to this podcast, maybe listen to it first and then see if you find it appropriate for them. Just a fair warning.
And if you're a child yourself and you're like, I'm cool, I can listen to this podcast, just pick a different episode of this podcast. I promise you, it's not for you, kid.
Listen to the Earthsea episode. That book is really great and you will love it.
Or Guards, got a farting dragon in it. Great one.
Yeah, Guards was great. Read that one instead. This is a spoiler-rich podcast, so if you are planning to read Dragon Prince and you don't want anything spoiled, I would suggest reading it first and then listening to us talk about it later. We'll be here waiting for you. If you are interested in listening to the trigger warnings that we have before you leave us, I'm going to list those next. So the trigger warnings are as follows: drug addiction and forced drug use, animal abuse, rape that results in pregnancy, dubious consent and grooming, death by being burned alive, and miscarriage.
We talked about these trigger warnings a lot before because I think they're important. So please listen to them and take them seriously.
Yeah, we will try to bring up when we are going to talk about these specific things and warn you before we start talking about these scenes where they happen. But some of these things are themes throughout the book. For example, drug addiction is a theme throughout the book, and miscarriage is something that a character is mentally dealing with through like the last third of the book. So it's not something that is just present in a single scene. It's something that is carried through large parts of the book. So if those are things that you have trouble with in books and you don't want to have to listen to us talk about it, don't listen to us. We understand. Protect your space. That's fine. So now that that's out of the way, do you want to dive in or do you want to talk about whether or not we would recommend it first?
Gosh. This is hard because I have not come to the conclusion yet about whether or not I would recommend it. Probably, oh God, I think we should wait till the end. I hate to say it, even though we've already spent this space.
So with those trigger warnings having been given, we're just going to dive into the plot. Ready?
As I'll ever be.
Okay. So this book is really long, by the way. It was incredibly long. So the book begins with a man named Zihava, who is the prince of a holding in the desert called Stronghold. And he is on a dragon hunt with his son-in-law named Chainol.
I think, yeah. He's
But
Che for most of the book,
yeah, he's referred to as Che for most of the book, so I'm going to call him Che from here on out. So they are hunting dragons, and they're specifically hunting a male dragon that is about to partake in mating with a bunch of female dragons. This is another thing that this book really like deep dives into is the mating practices of dragons. I don't know if you want to mention anything else about that right now.
No, it's the so this book is really long, but it was not necessarily a difficult read because of the length, because the writing is quite lovely and it gives you a really strong sense of the world, and we'll talk about that. But part of that is like the dragon husbandry. So you get like a lot of dragon, not even husbandry because they're not breeding them. They're just the dragons are more like wild animals that are breeding in the wild. So you get a lot of like how they breed, why they breed, where they breed, how many dragons are involved, all that other sort of stuff.
So dragons are huge. They have 4 legs. They're in multiple colors. So the dragon that they're hunting on this occasion is gold with black patterning on his body. It's described multiple times that the underside of their wings is a different color and normally like a darker color than the top side of their wings. And this dragon has this like it's described as like a velvety black underside to his wings. This is also the first book that we have read in this reading series that we have embarked upon where dragons are purely described as animals. Probably Guards was the closest to this, but the dragons in that were really described as kind of like the cartoon version of an animal where they still kind of had these anthropomorphic traits to them. But in this book, they are purely described as animals in the way that we would describe a tiger or a grizzly bear. Yeah, is there anything what you wanted to add to that description?
No, I think you're right that it's really interesting just how wild these animals, these dragons are. They do have some sort of intelligence to them,
Yeah.
but in the way that like a big cat does, where like, it can like trick you, but it's still there's no higher intelligence than just eating, sleeping, and reproducing.
Yeah, there's a line that's, like, way later in the book where 2 characters are talking about the dragons who actually are interested in them as a species and not just as this, like, thing that can be trophy hunted or as a threat to their society, and she says, "I think dragons are more intelligent than people think, and that they are making conscious decisions about where they are nesting, and they're looking at the cues in their environment before they nest." The culture surrounding dragons and their understanding of dragons could actually be pretty flawed, and they just wouldn't know it. They are very much an animal. There's this kind of alien intelligence to them when they do show their intelligence. It's not a human intelligence, which is really refreshing. I enjoyed that portrayal of dragons. But anyway, back to the scene. So Zehava has chosen this time to hunt this dragon because he is about to mate. So he's very distracted by these females. He's already been exhausted by the rituals that the dragons have to go through in order to show their prowess as males. So they have these battles with other males. They're very territorial. They have to do these like mating dances in like on the sand and then like in the sky. I think I might be remembering that incorrectly. So he's really tired, but he also is like kind of hyped up on this uh, mating energy, I guess, because he
Dragon
dragon
pheromones.
pheromones. Yeah, because there are all these females that he's getting ready to mate with who have like arrived in this one place and he want so he's distracted. And Zihava has successfully killed, I think this will be his ninth dragon, he says.
Yep.
But also, while this is going on, Zihava is thinking about his son, whose name is Rohan, who is the actual main character of this book. And he's kind of thinking about how he wishes that his son was more like his son-in-law, whose name is Jay again, and that he doesn't really understand his son. His son doesn't seem like he has a lot of interest in women. He doesn't seem like he has a ton of interest in politics. He's just very bookish and quiet. And he kind of wishes that he maybe was a little bit more like Che because Che is like very much this classic warrior. He is virile, he breeds horses, that kind of thing. But anyway, we cut away from them on this dragon hunt and we meet Zehava's wife, whose name is Milar, and she is sitting with her sister. I think they're eating grapes. And her sister's name is Andrade. And they're twins, and they are also discussing Rohan. And this is a thing that happens over and over in the book where nobody can think about anything other than Rohan because he is the main character. But basically, what's happening is Andrade is trying to kind of manipulate Millar into realizing that Andrade's choice for Rohan as a marriage prospect is the correct one, and there are no other viable options. So she's talking to Millar about like, well, he could marry Rolstra's girls, but then they'll probably kill him after they produce a son, and then so that Rolstra can take control of Stronghold as a
We also at this point get introduced to the big bad of the book, who's Ralstra, who's like
Yeah.
another prince, but like the highest prince.
Yeah, he's the High Prince.
And we learn that he's only had daughters, so he's got like 20 daughters.
He has a 17.
Okay, he's got like 20 daughters.
Well, you said like 20 daughters, and I feel like if that is an exaggeration, that could mean, oh, he has like 6, but he really does have like 20 daughters. That's not much of an exaggeration.
Yeah, keeps trying for his son, hasn't gotten one yet. And but he's a big bad, and if Rohan were to marry him, then bad things would happen. And this is established pretty early.
Yeah, so we learn that the desert so the stronghold is in the desert, but that doesn't mean that it's a poor holding. I think they have like diamond mines in their desert. They're pretty rich in resources, even though it is a desert holding, and it does seem like it connects to a lot of other places in the world that we are in. So Andrade is trying to do this, and she's kind of thinking this is something that I found very interesting because while she's talking to Milar, she's thinking about how stupid Milar is. She's like, my sister is so stupid. She just wants to be a wife and a mother, and she doesn't understand. She doesn't even know that I'm manipulating her. And while she's thinking about this, she's also thinking about how Milar is a lot prettier than she is. She's like, Milar got all the brute beauty, and I got the brains. And at first, when I was reading this, I was like, oh no, we're dealing with another book that places women in this dichotomy of it's not smart and pretty, but smart or pretty. But actually, I think the book is using this as a way to discuss how we internalize ideas of gender roles, and this is just one of those examples.
It's also worth saying that like once Andrade like lays out like Andrade works Malar through the thought process of like what would happen if Rohan married one of these daughters and what would happen if they have a son. And Malar like figures it out. She just like
Yeah,
hasn't done the work and the scheming. So like even
no.
then we're like shown that like Malar is not necessarily as stupid as she's led to believe, and that like both of them.
Yeah. Oh, I don't think that Malar is actually stupid at all. I think that she's intelligent in a way that Andrade does not value. Because even Andrade, like later when she's like looking out the windows of Stronghold, which Millar is the one who kind of did all the design work of the keep, like she updated the keep. She's like thinking about how Millar like was really smart in the kind of glass she chose. Even though she is like obviously not like, oh, my sister is smart. She's not like coming to a realization. She's like kind of begrudgingly admitting that her sister made this good decision. But it is shown over and over again that Millar is actually a very talented interior designer, architect, and potentially a bioengineer because she creates a garden in the middle of the desert, which is really impressive in my opinion. And she was the one who did that. So I think that she just has a kind of intelligence that Andrade does not value because Andrade values more of a political intelligence, and I think that Millar doesn't have as much of it as Andrade does.
A thing that I really like about this book is that I think it doesn't, even though it talks about gender a lot, it doesn't necessarily fall into like this type of femininity is good and this type of like things that are
Yeah,
masculine are like better. I don't know if we'll talk about this during the summary, but like multiple times throughout the book, it is implied that Malar has done as much for maintaining the kingdom and growing its prosperity through like running the household and the castle as Zehav has done with his battles. So it's like the book itself has like a really lovely understanding of like women's work and like what's important, women's
mhm,
work quotations, finger
yeah,
quotes. You can't hear that in a podcast, but imagine me doing them. An understanding of like how both statecraft and warcraft are important and like how you do both. That's a huge theme. Anyway, we're getting back into the book. They're gossiping about Rohan.
we learn that Rohan again is bookish, but he is actually good at fighting. They didn't want him to enter into this battle, but so he snuck in as a normal foot soldier and didn't tell anyone that he was doing this so that he could also participate in this battle, and he was very successful in it.
Yeah, he, despite not being part of like the more traditional masculine dragon hunts that are like a hunt of way of showing that you're like fighting in prowess. He did something that's also respectable, which is participating as a foot soldier in a ground skirmish to like be able to prove to everyone that actually, yes, I can fight, even though I don't want to do it in this way that you guys value.
Yeah, I'm not even sure that a lot of people know that he, other than his immediate family, know that he was actually a participant in that battle.
Yeah, I don't actually know either how many people knew that.
I think he just wanted to participate in it. Like, I think that he felt kind of duty bound to do it, and the fact that they didn't want him to was of no consequence to him because he was like, "Well, I'm gonna do it anyway," which is the thing that he does multiple times in this book. He also is like, so he is very smart. He's pretty, like, politically minded. He's probably a virgin. This is said by a lot of people in a lot of different scenes. They're like, "He's probably a virgin." And they're right. He is probably a virgin. It's just weird that everyone's thinking about the virginity of this guy.
Has weird opinions about virginity, and it's sort of frowned upon in the same way that it was in like the last book we read, but not so much in the
The other book treated it as like a joke. This book treats it as a theme. And we'll get into how the book does that later. So we cut back to Che and Zehava, and Zahava is battling the dragon. We do get some background on the social structure of the world. So Zehava is considered this like very successful warlord. We know now that there is this kind of, they seem like a nomadic group called the Merida who are a threat to the desert, and they want to, it kind of feels like
they're a plot device. They're a plot device. I'm sorry.
they're like a faceless villain. We get one character, like, for one scene later in the book who's just, like, thinking, "This is weird," for a scene, and then he's gone, who is part of the Merida. Otherwise, they're just kind of this faceless group. I don't think the book ever explicitly says this, but just the way that it's constructed does kind of make it feel like they were the original people who lived on this land, and then they were kicked off, and they just, like, want to live on it again.
The book pulls a lot from Dune,
Yeah.
which you'll get from the desert, substitute dragons for worms, and like you're pretty much there.
Also, the witches too, which we're gonna get to in a minute.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression that they were sort of like evil Fremen.
Well, they're like the Fremen in the second half of Dune when the Fremen start fighting back. But because, yeah, we don't have a character who's like a part of them, they just feel like kind of, I don't know that that is true. I might just be like reading into it because of like my biases and like tropes that exist in other books. So I could be wrong, but it does kind of feel like they, I don't know. It's a weird, they aren't, I think that they aren't fleshed out enough in a book that fleshes things out so explicitly in so many other places. I do wish that the Merida were given some more time.
There's so many princes in this book that I let wash over me like a nice beautiful rain and did not internalize all of them, but there's like so much information about them and like how they are. And then the Merida are just like they're just coming to get your land.
This monolith, yeah, of raiders.
Like you see one on screen, and I do think that they're because I know they got kicked out of the desert, so we don't know if they're like necessarily the people that were always there or if they like moved into the land. But it is important to know that like Rohan is like fair skinned and blonde haired and blue eyed, not really a desert, complexion.
He is blonde haired and blue skinned and or
Blue
blue
skin.
skinned, fair skinned and blue eyed because well, I think his skin actually is not quite white.
It's got a tan, I think.
Or maybe, yeah, maybe he just has a tan. But his mother is like definitely a white lady, but she doesn't come from the desert. She married into the desert. And Zuhava and Che and Tobin are all described as being darker in complexion. But yeah, he's like definitely like the way that he is described in the book, he's like a white guy. While he's battling this dragon, he is again thinking about how strong Rohan is and how clever he is. But he still worries about Rohan's ability to take his place as the leader of Stronghold. And then we cut to Tobin, and this is the first time we see Rohan on screen, even though it is from Tobin's perspective. And Tobin is Rohan's sister, who is married to Che. And she's watching as Rohan is playing with her 2 twin boys. She has 2 young boys who are twins, playing a game of dragons with them, which is a game that, like, is played over and over and over in the book with different children, where he, like, is pretending to be a dragon and they're, like, pretending to kill him. And Tobin comes down, and they do have this kind of nice sibling moment. They're kind of, like, buggering at each other, and, like, he picks up Tobin and, like, drops her in a water trough, which just seemed like a realistic sibling moment to me.
The book has so many like really sweet and gentle interpersonal interactions between the family members where you really see how much they love each other. They're like very realistic and they feel like a family that's like really does love each other and you really grow to like them and feel really attached to them. And if everything in this book had been within that like vibe, I think we would have liked it better. But there's just so much stuff that's like very much in contrast with that.
One thing that is in contrast with it, and we'll get to that. Anyway, she talks to Rohan. She's like, "You need to find a wife," and he's like, "I don't want a wife." And she talks to him about how Che and Zehava are on this dragon hunt, and she's like, "Well, you should have hunted and killed that dragon because it would have proven to everybody that you actually are worthy of inheriting the stronghold." And Rohan's like, "I don't want to kill a dragon. I like dragons. They're cool." And Tobin has this kind of moment where she's like, "They're dangerous." And we learn here that dragons, the way that I understood the way that dragons are portrayed in this book is very much the way that wolves in the United States are culturally understood, where in the United States there's this cultural bias against wolves that they're really, really dangerous. They're the symbol of wildness. They're the symbol of uncontrollability, that they are a horrifying threat to both human life and livestock, which isn't really backed up by any real evidence. And in the book, dragons are portrayed exactly the same way, where they have this kind of there's this huge mythos around dragons that kind of they have this symbolic nature in the book where they are this kind of unknowability, this wildness, this power. Rohan really sees them as a symbol of freedom throughout the entire book, but they also pose this perceived threat to human life and livestock, where Tobin even is like, "We lost like 8 mares to the dragons this year." And again, Tobin and Che, they make a lot of their money by breeding and selling horses. Yeah, like that is like a detriment of dragons, but like how many mares must they have if this is their chief income? They probably have a ton. So Rohan does kind of, in his perspective, he thinks about like, well, really, how are they really a danger? And he even at one point, he doesn't say this exactly the way I'm about to say it, but he's like, they must be important for the ecosystem for there to be so many of them, which was like an interesting thing for him to say, but he doesn't say it like that. He says it in a more like fantasy way. And Tobin is talking about, in her mind, she's like, well, there are always more dragons regardless of how many they kill. And we also learn that the reason that they kill the dragon sires before they start mating isn't just because they're distracted, it's because they if they're able to kill the dragon sires before they're able to mate with the females seem like they die if they're not able to lay their eggs.
Yeah, it's definitely like a very calculated population control. It really did feel a little bit like how we were like systematically killing the buffalo.
Yeah, so they're just trying to destroy this dragon population. Anyway, but Rohan, we learn, loves dragons. He's like a huge dragon nerd, like me. So we turn back to Andrade and Milar's perspective, and we're in their perspective when Che and Zehava return from the dragon hunt, and we learn that Zehava has been mortally wounded by this dragon. Andrade then helps dress Zehava's wounds and pulls Tobin aside after she helps dress. So Zehava's like awake and alive at this point, but I think it was like a gut wound.
Yeah, basically it's just like a horrible gut wound. I think Che is literally described as like shoving
Like holding it in.
things back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's bad. So after Andrade helps dress Zehava's wounds, because it does seem that Andrade has this. Oh, I haven't really described what she does for a living, but it does seem like her position has some kind of medical background to it because she, in multiple times in the book, is helping people with wounds and childbirth and things like that. But Andrade,
Do you want to just talk about the Sunrunners in general right here?
yeah, so Andrade is the leader of what's called the goddess keep, which their god in this book is the goddess. She doesn't have a different name. She's just called the goddess. And the goddess keep is where the people are trained as sun runners. This is where the magic system in the world kind of comes into play. And it kind of is poorly described in some ways and very explicitly described in others, where basically there are different powers associated with what's called like the Faraday gift. And the Faraday gift seems like it's genetically handed down. So different people are more likely to have it based on who their parentage was. And the first, I don't even know where to begin because like they're kind of connected, but they're kind of like not. So one of the powers that you have when you're a sun runner or when you're like a Faraday is you can control fire and you can summon fire. Another thing that you can do, and this is probably more important to the plot and more useful to the people of this world, is you can communicate through beams of light, which is why they're called sun runners. So they can talk to each other through this network that they can establish through these beams of light. And everyone kind of has an aura. All the sun runners have like an aura that has a unique coloration to it. So once you learn someone's coloration, you can contact them really reliably to talk to them over any distance as long as there's light. So sunlight is something you can communicate through. Moonlight is another thing you can communicate through. And it does seem that flame, firelight, is a third thing you can communicate through. Sunrise, sunset, and total darkness are times when it is very difficult to communicate or impossible. If you're in total darkness, you are unable to do this thing. And it is more dangerous to communicate during sunrise and sunset because the shadows are growing. So you can become what's called shadow lost more easily, where you kind of lose yourself. And there are different ways to become shadow lost. So because it is sunset when Zehava is having these issues, Andrade pulls aside Tobin and asks Tobin to help her send a magical message. And Tobin's like, I didn't know I had the gift. And Andrade is like, yeah, you do. And it's kind of like a weird way of bringing this. It's like this didn't come up until now, really, ever.
This happens multiple times with multiple characters where they're like, surprised they actually could have magical powers to the point where I was like, I think everyone has magic and they just like
Don't
don't.
know it. Yeah, it kind of feels like that.
It's so confusing because at first it's like it's a small thing and then like more and more people are like, surprise sunrunners, and you're just like, wait a minute.
Yeah. So she sends this magical message to our other main character, whose name is Sinead. And I apologize. I know I'm going to pronounce that name incorrectly at some point during this podcast. Okay, so Sinead is a sunwriter who is currently living at the Goddess Keep. Something I do want to just mention about the Goddess Keep and this magic system, because we did relate it to Dune, these witches. I mean, they're not really witches. They're kind of, they call them like Sunrunner Witch.
Witches.
They're witches. They are kind of, they do kind of feel similar to the Bene Gesserit in Dune or like the Aes Sedai in Wheel of Time. But this actually is not a gendered magic system, which I also really appreciated because I have trouble with gendered magic systems since I think that it leads to a lot of gender determinism. But this is not a gendered magic system. Regardless of your gender, you might or might not have the gift. And it does seem like the hierarchy at the Goddess Keep is based solely on your power and like quote unquote level as a sunrunner, because it is based in 10 levels. So each time you reach a certain level of ability, you get a ring on your finger up to 10 levels. And Andrade has 10 rings because she is the leader. But it does seem that men and women, I don't think that Melanie Rawn had a conception that there were other genders, but it seems like regardless of your gender, you might be in a different place in the hierarchy at the Goddess Keep. It also does say that people are at the Goddess Keep who do not have the gift, and they are treated with the same amount of respect as the people who do have the gift. So they are given a place. They just have a different role within the structure of the running of the Goddess Keeps, which is like kind of I liked that. We don't get a ton of how the politics work in this specific place, but I did like that it was mentioned. and it seemed to be true with the way that, like, Ostval, who's another character who works at the Goddess Keep but does not have the gift, is treated, and the way he has there is a lot of respect toward him.
Yeah, the most we see of the Goddess Keep is just through Sinead basically thinking about her life and how she got to this point in this scene that we're talking about, that where Andrade is like contacting her, and the reason she's contacting her is because at some point during her time in Goddess Keep, she goes through a ritual.
So this is the trigger for grooming. I don't believe that Melanie Rawn realized that this is what this scene is actually describing, but in our 2024 lens, this is a pretty like cut and dry example of grooming. It doesn't happen on page, but she's thinking about this event in her life. Do you want to describe what happened?
We learned that, just to go back a little bit and then get through the scene, is that we learned that Sinead comes from a royal family, but her parents died, and then her brother's new wife, like, wasn't necessarily like completely terrible, but just like wasn't a good mom for her, and basically like didn't is really, really cheap and didn't want to pay a dowry.
Yeah.
So she just sort of like sells her to Goddess Keep to like live in a nunnery essentially. So she goes there, she like discovers her powers. She's actually quite grateful because she really likes being a witch. And then there's like a lot of symbolism around childhood, womanhood, and motherhood, which is like I feel like a pretty common maiden matron crone
Mother
thing.
Crone, yeah. We meet her in a flashback of from 5 years in the past, and she is thinking about that, all that JoJo just said, while she's undergoing this ritual that deals with this idea of the maiden mother crow, where she is walking through this sacred space inside of the Goddess Keep where there are all these trees, and there's, like, the child tree, or, like, the girl tree, the woman tree, the maiden tree. I'm saying these out of order. There's like the last one is the hag tree, which is an interesting choice of word.
Incredible.
She also mentions that the men who go through and into this grove and deal with these trees, they have a different terminology for the trees, but she doesn't know what those terms are because she's not a man. And when that was said, I was like, do they have like the career tree? But I do kind of think that it is dealing with relationships with the men too, is kind of what
We're talking about it. We should just say it. Like, so basically, when she turns 16, she like ritually has sex in a dark room with a stranger
with a stranger.
that they pick out randomly. Well,
Yeah, who we find out it's not random. Who we find out later is this guy who I just mentioned, Yuraval, who's like 45 when she's 21. So he's like way older than she is. And he knows. So it's not anonymous for both parties. He was aware that he was entering into this sex ritual with Sinead when she was 16 to take her virginity.
specifically by Andrade, but like that's something that Sinead never finds out.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she has sex, and after she has sex, she goes to this grove with these trees and like waters them and does like a little prayer. And then in the water, she has a vision of her and Rohan together as like a married couple, and then she has a vision that her hair becomes like a golden crown around both of them, and that the only way that he can become prince is through marriage to her. So she in the past tells this to Andrade, and Andrade is like, oh boy, got it, I can make this happen. Something that we learn here is that there's multiple sort of prophetic visions throughout the book, and it's made clear early in the beginning that, like, while these are things that can come to pass, it is very much within the person who's having the vision's power to make them happen or not make them happen.
Yeah.
This is also a scene where we learn that Andrade also had a vision of someone they were supposed to be wed to. And Andrade makes it very clear that she worked very hard to make sure that did not happen.
Yeah. This was 5 years in the past. So, basically, Sinead has this understanding that this is the man she's going to marry for 5 years from when she's 16 to when she's 21, and there I mean, it's pretty clear, like, that sex ritual is grooming, right?
I don't, like, have a dictionary definition of grooming, so I don't know exactly, but it's pretty fucked up.
Basically, she was, like, conditioned from when she was, like, 5 and got to the goddess temple that this was something that would be a good thing for her. And I don't think that, like, her having the vision of Rohan is grooming because he also is, like, the same age as she is, and it's, like, the goddess kind of telling them. But what were you going to say?
No, I was just gonna say that it just I think it's supposed to set up that, like, sex is a little bit more normalized, but even then and, like, a natural part of, like, growing up, but even then, there's just so many themes about, like, sexual abuse in this book that it just feels gross within the context of it.
Think that it's also just gross that, like, we know that the person she had sex with and she had to undergo this ritual at 16, like, this was, like, a planned ritual that all of the Sunrunners go through. It's not like something that she was like partner was chosen for her. She had no control over who that partner was, and then we learn later that that partner is old enough to be her father.
Yeah, it's worth saying that Sinead thinks very positively on the experience.
But she, in book, never thinks about it as a negative. She is very proud of this experience. So, that being all of what I just said having been said, she, in the context of the book, really does value that experience that she underwent, for better or for worse.
And the Sunrunners are a very sex
Yeah.
positive group.
Yeah, there's another character whose name is Camigwen, and then her betrothed, Osvel. They get married at some point in the book, but they are having, like, obviously having sex with each other and are in a committed relationship that has been going on for a while, and they don't see that there's, like, an issue with having a physical relationship before they have been officially married because they know that they are, like, each other's partners, and the same thing kind of happens with Tobin and Che, like, she mentions that they have sex before they get married as well, so it's, like, it's a more sex positive world. Anyway, except for some instances, which we'll get into. So, this is the whole all to set up the fact that Andrade is contacting her because she's like, "Hey, Sinead, it's time for you to come to the stronghold and get married." And she's very specific about she's like, "You need to bring a contingent of this many people. You need to bring a wedding dress. I want you to come in fashion. I want you to burst through the doors dramatically and make a grand entrance," like all this stuff she's expecting Sinead to do. So they take off for, and it's like a kind of long journey. It's like 2 weeks or something.
2 weeks. She, like, brings Camigwen, who's
Mhm.
her best friend and is also a Ferrati, and Camigwen's, like, betrothed/beloved, Osval, and then Camigwen is, like, an incredibly traditional feminine presence,
Mhm.
and she's great. She's like, "Oh, no, I have to sew you a dress. I don't have any time." So she's, like, futzing around with that, and, like, Ostaval's a very, like, traditional, like, masculine presence where, he's like, "I'll get the horses and get us across and blah, blah, blah," and they, like, set off together, and it's, like, a cute party.
We cut back to Andrade, and she is looking for Rohan, but she acknowledges that she's not going to be able to find him until he allows her to find him. Like, this is something that apparently has happened before, where she's been looking for him, and he really is able to hide from her. And she finally does find him. He's standing in the watchtower that's like overlooking the desert, and you can see for like miles and miles and miles. And the way that this book establishes setting is really, really successful. Like, you really do feel like you're in the desert when you're at Stronghold. You really, really feel like you're beside a river when you're beside a river. But she and Rohan are talking, and they're kind of talking about this ritual. So there's a flame in this watchtower that was lit when Zehava took power, and it will be extinguished when he dies. And then once Rohan is crowned like the ruler of this holding, a flame will be lit for him. And he's saying, like, well, my wife should actually be the one cleaning up the ashes after my father dies, but I don't have a wife. So my sister and my mother have to do it. And he kind of seems like he's having this feeling of like, oh, should have a wife by now. Like, he's feeling it for the first time. And Andrade is like, well, do I have some news for you? And he kind of gets annoyed at her at first. He's like, you are just trying to like manipulate things. And then Andrade shows him a vision because another power that the Sunrunners have is they can show you, like, images of people through the flame, so she pulls up a vision of Sinead for him to look at, and he's like, "Okay, yeah, like, I'll marry her, fine, because she's pretty."
There's a great scene in it where he's like, "I don't want just, like, any pretty face," and then Andrade's like, "She's got a brain,"
Yeah.
and it's a little bit like if anyone has seen that clip in the Elvis of movie when, like, the record executive, Tom Hanks, is like, "He's white?" It's like that, but, like, it's like, "She's got a brain," which is, like, kinda cute, but also just like,
Yeah.
"Oi."
Yeah. But the other thing that we do learn in this scene, I do like Andrade as a character, I think she's pretty complex, is that she is really ambitious and she's trying to pull strings, and it's very reminiscent of the Bene Gesserit in Dune in this way, where she's trying to control like, really what her goal is she wants to create a Sunrunner ruler.
Yes.
But so she is really ambitious and she is trying to pull these strings, but she also is really caring and she does really care about Rohan and his happiness. And he's like, she's a good choice for you, not just because she's pretty, but because she's really smart and she values intelligence in her partner as well. And they are a good match for each other. Like,
She gets cast as manipulating a lot, like, in the early scenes and then throughout the book, but, like, "Hey, the goddess kind of was like, 'You guys should hang out,' and also you guys keep looking at each other and getting inspired by this, like, capital F fire." They
yeah,
use, like, capital F fire all the time in the book to be like, they're horny for each other. Yeah, they're like, "Fire touched," or like, "I felt the fire consume him."
yeah.
But, like, they're like, "Oh, she's always manipulating us," and I'm like, "It seems like she's like, 'Hey, you guys like each other, you should hang.'"
Matchmaker. Like, come on, guys. Like, there's a difference between these two things. Anyway, then the scene ends and we meet Lady Palila, who is the consort of Rolstra. And Rolstra, as we mentioned before, is the big bad in this book. And we are in her perspective. She's overlooking these gardens where she is living, which is called Prince March, and all of the like 17 daughters are just like hanging out in this garden. Lady Palila does mention in her thoughts that she is pregnant and she's not showing yet. She does not like to be pregnant, and she's desperately hoping that this pregnancy will be a son. And she's hoping for that because she wants to cement herself as the wife of Rolstra instead of just his consort. And she knows she's kind of getting to an age where it's going to be hard for her to have a pregnancy after this. She's like getting to the end of her childbearing years. So she's really, really hoping that this is a boy. So she thinks about his daughters. She also like thinks about the fact in her mind. So he's had other consorts and he had one wife before her. And she thinks about how she really had a hand in all of their deaths.
It's a pretty great villain scene
Yeah.
where, like, so the wife dies of, like, kinda natural causes, but then it goes through her being like, "Oh, and it was so sad when that other concert tripped and fall and crashed her head in after I pushed her down the stairs," and it's just like,
And then she like, yeah, the one like she was like, "Oh, she was sick and too bad her medicine got mixed up after I switched the bottles." Yeah, she doesn't feel any remorse for having killed these women. She only feels fear that Rolstra could potentially find out that she killed these other women. So she walks around the garden and she talks to two of the daughters who are similar in age to Rohan, and their names are Aanthe and Pansala, and they are two of the daughters of Rolstra's actual wife when she was alive, so they are legitimate princesses and not just ladies.
pretty clear early in the book, like, of all of these ladies, which ones are actually important to the story and who you should focus on, which I appreciate.
And they kind of have this kind of catty back and forth with each other, and then Palila leaves, and Ianthe and Pansala starts like kind of plotting because they're like, "We do not want her to marry our father. We do not want to cement her, like her to be able to cement herself as a ruler in this land." So they kind of plot about how they're going to switch her baby out if it's a boy. They're going to make sure that it's a girl.
Yeah, we also it's also made pretty clear that, like, once Rolstra has a boy, it's gonna break bad for all of the girls.
Yeah, they don't want him to have a son at all because it's going to be worse for them. Then we do get Rolstra's point of view, and he is meeting with his captured Sunrunner. So it's established in this book that each court has a Sunrunner in their court because that's how they are communicating really quickly and easily with each other throughout the entire landscape. But Rolstra's Sunrunner was revoked from him years and years ago, and I so he captures a Sunrunner whose name is Kriego when he was on his way to a different place, and basically, Sunrunners have a lot of trouble when they're on the water. It's worse than it kind of is like seasickness times 10, where they're, like, really, really sick, they can get really, really sick and nauseous, but they also tend to, like, pass out. They kind of enter into this fugue state where they don't know where they are. They get very confused and disoriented. So while Kriego years ago was crossing a river, Rolstra sent his men and grabbed Kriego, and they just kept him on the river all the way back to Prince March, so he couldn't fight back at all. Once he captured Kriego, so this is the trigger warning for forced drug addiction. And this all happens off screen and in summary in Kriego's perspective, where Kriego's thinking back to this experience where he didn't really realize what was happening because Rolstra was drugging his wine with this really addictive drug called Dranoth. The way that Dranoth is described, it kind of puts you in this euphoric state. It seems like in the beginning you get really disoriented. Also, Kriego says that when he was before he was like really, really, really dependent on it and like couldn't even think about anything without being high, when he first took it, it made him like really turned on, which I feel like kind of is a plot point later in the book, but it's not explicitly stated when other people are high on
Mm.
Dranoth.
Yep, that people definitely feel horny when they're high on Dronoth.
And it's exceedingly addictive. So, like, basically, Rolstra comes to him after he's drugged his wine for a few days and is like, "You're never gonna recover. You need this for the rest of your life." Whether that's true or not, we don't actually know because it doesn't seem like that is actually the case.
No one else in the book after Kringo gets addicted, so
Well, we'll get into it. But he now is extremely dependent on it. He's really addicted to it, and he's basically willing to do whatever Rolstra wants him to do in order to get more of it. And it's actually Palila who has the supply of it. So Rolstra uses him to spy on the other courts and specifically Stronghold because he really, really wants to take control of Stronghold. So Kriego tells him that Zehava is dying. And Rolstra is really excited by this because he's like, well, I'm going to really be able to easily marry one of my daughters to him. And then I will gain control of Stronghold once he bears a son. Palila and him have a conversation about which daughter they should marry him to. I think they, at this point, are like, it should be Aeonte. They go back and forth a few
yeah,
times.
they go back and forth.
We also learn in this scene that Palila is really afraid of fire because Kriego summons an image of Rohan in the flame for them to see, and it flares up and it scares Palila, and Rolstra acknowledges this, sees what's going on, and he is really gross about it.
Him being really gross about things is a theme of the book.
Yeah, he, like, kind of uses it to, like it's like a bedroom gross thing. Back at Stronghold, Zehava sends for Rohan, and they do have, like, a little chat. They have a heart-to-heart. They admit that they love each other, and we do learn that Zehava really does care deeply for Rohan and vice versa, and he does have a respect for his son, even though he doesn't necessarily understand his son, which was, like, nice, and I think that that was, like, a subversion of a trope that we often see that we definitely saw in Blue Moon Rising, where the father, even though he doesn't understand his son, he still really respects his child and trusts his child with the future of his holding.
It's one of the many lovely interpersonal family scenes we see throughout the book where like all Zihava really wants is to connect with his son who they're very different and they manage to they find like some common ground in which they can both understand each other and their own differences. And then Zihava wants to know that he is like prepared Rohan to be a prince, which he knows that there's like people out there that are like wolves in the desert, not actual wolves, metaphoric wolves, but like he's worried about that his princedom is gonna fall, and Rohan's like kind of like lets him in on his like evil master plan to like protect the desert and his princedom, and he's like, oh, Rohan's gonna be fine, and it's like a
Yeah.
lovely moment.
Yeah, it is really sweet. It shows that, like, these men in this book, they aren't just strong or emotional, that these men are, like, real men. Like, not like real men, like, are you a real man?" They are, like, what men actually are like in reality, where men can be strong and have emotion and can feel love and can be soft. And I feel like Zehava is a great example of this, like, he has this real softness to him, even though he is a really strong warrior. And I think that Rohan also is a very soft boy for most of the book. Like he's very, very kind and gentle in a lot of ways. And even though he can be a huge brat at some points, I mean, he's 21. And I think this is kind of undermined by some of the things that happen later in the book. I also think that Che is like a great example of kind of a soft guy. Like he just loves his wife so much, but he is like a very strong willed character, even though he and his wife have this really loving relationship. I don't know. I like the way that a lot of the men were portrayed in this book. It felt realistic to how men actually are instead of this like weird paper cutout of like this idealized strong man.
I think yes, you're right. There's in the same way that there's a lot of different equally valid versions of
Yeah.
women and how those women exist within the understanding of what it means to be a woman and how they do like women's work. There's also a lot of different depictions of men and how they interact, both like what it means to be a man, each coming to it their own way and how they deal with the concept of like women of men's work. And I think it's like it's something that's established early where you have like multiple men and multiple women that exist in similar spheres but work independently, and it adds a lot of vibrance to this story that this book doesn't really do much with, but it's nice that it's there.
Yeah. So we cut back to Sinead and the gang, and they're crossing this really large river that kind of designates the territory of the desert, and they have to cross on a barge. They have to take multiple trips across on this little barge or like raft because they don't have it's not large enough for them to fit all of their people and all of their horses and all of their supplies on at the same crossing. So Sinead and Camaguen and a bunch of others cross, and then when the horses are crossing, the barge capsizes and they unfortunately lose a ton of their horses and a ton of their supplies. I don't think any humans die, but they do end up having to leave like 8 or so people behind just because they don't have enough horses to be able to get there by the time that Andrade had designated that they get there, which really bothers Andrade because she was like really specific about how she wanted Sinead to appear. And basically now Sinead can't appear in a wedding dress. She can't make this grand entrance. She's going to come in her traveling gear, and she's not going to have this like regal escort that had been planned.
Yeah, Kemi's upset about it, and Sinead's like, whatever, we gotta get there.
Zehava does die, and they light the funeral pyre to signal it. As this is happening, Rohan and Che leave to kill the dragon. This is another part of the book where I was like, the way that these two things are happening at the same time, like as they're leaving through the stronghold gate, as this funeral beacon is being lit to signal his death, felt really like cool. Where you got this sense, it felt like really cinematic. But there are all these places in the book where they're just like these small moments where a scene is being set up, where you kind of get this feeling of these two things are happening at the same time, or you get this real sense of place and real sense of setting through the way that it's described that just feels it really immerses you in the world.
Yeah, and you feel the weight of Zihava's death is they're lighting this huge funeral pyres, and the funeral pyre also exists to signal the other princes to let them know what's going on. So
Mhm.
there's just a lot of really good world building and storytelling happening.
Yeah. And basically, Rohan and Che leave to kill the dragon, partially because it's this revenge on his father, because it killed his father, but also because Rohan knows that he needs to do this in order to show people that he is worthy of inheriting this kingdom. Because to this point, he hasn't really had much of a presence in the both like the vassals' understanding of him as a ruler, nor has he had a presence with the other princes of the holdings. They've kind of just seen him as this bookish child that's just been like over in the sidelines. So he's trying to show that he is able to do this extremely dangerous act. So we learn that this dragon is still with the female dragons, that it's bred with a bunch of the female dragons. We learn a little bit more about dragon mating rituals too, which we learned so much about this in this book, where basically the male dragon is with each lady dragon, like each day. and then that lady dragon, like, lays her eggs. So he's still mating with these dragons when they get to this nesting site, and because he was wounded by Zehava, he is an older dragon, so it's said that this is probably, like, his 9th or 10th mating season, and so he's mated that many times, and dragons only mate every 3 years, that he this might be his last time that he's able to win one of those fights that the dragons have. So he has all these older injuries from past battles with other dragons, and he is probably very exhausted from mating with all of these female dragons. So Rohan's not really worried. Che's a little bit more worried, but Rohan's like, he's not going to be able to fight because he's so old and like weak right now. And the dragon comes out, and we do get this great description of the dragon where it talks about him like stretching out his hind legs and how it would have been kind of funny to watch if he hadn't come to kill the dragon. And then, like, where Rohan is standing on like the side of this canyon is the sun is behind him. So the dragon has to like squint to look at him. And Rohan also like acknowledges that this would be funny. Like, it was kind of like this weird unguarded moment by this dragon where it kind of shed that ferocity that he had in his head of what dragons are like, and it became just this like creature that's just big. But then the dragon does attack Rohan, and they fight, and it is very frightening for Rohan to be that close to such a large creature. He does almost get eaten a few times, but he is able to stab it in the eye and kill it. While he's fighting it, he does like cut his arm, so he has to take his shirt off to like wrap around his arm. And this is a thing that happens throughout the book where like he is taking his shirt off constantly. Like, he's always taking his shirt off. And I really think it was just because the author was like, I want him to not be wearing a shirt when he meets Sinead. So while they are returning after killing this dragon to Stronghold, they kind of cross with Sinead's party. And they all meet. And Rohan asks to speak with Sinead privately. So they walk off together. He's not wearing a shirt. And she's like, "Ooh, he's not wearing a shirt." And he like touches her shin or something. And then they have that fire touch that JoJo explained later where they're like, "Ooh, this is, you know,
It's also like kind of a moment where like Sinead has like been drowned in a river and like is in her riding stuff and is like covered in dirt and sand. So they're both like
yeah,
super grimy in
in
a
a hot,
hot
but in a
way.
hot way." Yeah. Um, and they're both like, "Wow, this person's really, really hot."
Grimy in a hot way.
So he basically says to her, "Look, I intend to marry you. I want to marry you. This is not in doubt, but I'm going to act really aloof and kind of like a dick until this thing called the Riala happens." And the Riala is basically something that happens every 3 years where all of the princedoms come together and they reestablish borders, they reestablish treaties and trade routes and all this stuff. So it's this huge political thing. And he wants to pretend that he is available to the marriage market at this point because he thinks it'll give him an edge when it comes to those negotiations. So he tells her all this. He's like, "So keep it on the DL, but I intend to marry you." And she agrees. She's like, "Sure, that sounds great." And then they return to the party as a whole. They're given rooms, and we see a lot more of like the interior design of the Stronghold, and all of this is designed by Millar, and it's always described as like this thing that has been chosen with this eye for aesthetic, but also with as much comfort in mind, but without being ever garish or overdone. So she just has there's like this elegance to everything, every like aspect of the room, from the tiles to like the window panes to the mosquito netting on the bed to the bathtub. And like then Sinead takes like a bath, and she it's a cold bath, it's mentioned, because it's the desert and they don't want to take hot baths in the desert, which is like also cute. But she talks about when she unplugs the bathtub to get the water out, that the drain has like a lot of suction, and that this like does this double duty of flushing out the drains, and that not all of the keeps have this technology. And it is implied that it's something that Millar also like had installed. So Millar is like this amazing like architect. So she has this intelligence, and this is brought up multiple times by multiple people, that Millar just has this different kind of intelligence than something that's traditionally valued, and it's a more quiet intelligence, which is great, and I really appreciated that in the writing. Andrade does meet with Shined, and she immediately figures out the plan, and then they discuss it. But then we get these two simultaneous bathing scenes One is with Tobin and Che, and the other one is with Andrade and Rohan. So I'm gonna describe the one with Tobin and Che first. Che is bathing and Tobin's like, "Who is she? Like, I want to know everything about it. Like, what happened? Like, what happened with the dragon?" She's trying to ask Che like all these different questions, and you do get this insight into their marriage because she's like kind of aggressively scrubbing him down and like chastising him and interrogating him for information, and seems like it's like kind of turning him on, and he like is enjoying this attention but also this aggression from her.
Like a very like playful relationship where like Tobin is seen as in some way
Yeah.
like definitely Zahava's like
Mhm.
daughter and has like a lot of his ferocity in her in a way that is like respected and appreciated. So it's just
But it does give you the sense that their relationship is very equal, like, he shares everything with her. She is a big part of the decision making and, like, the way that they both kind of interact with the world. It is like this, like, pseudo erotic scene where you feel like it's kind of the precursor to an erotic scene that does not happen because he, like, kind of tells her, like, "If you keep touching me, I'm gonna wanna have sex with you," and she's just like, "I don't wanna have sex right now," and she, like, kinda leaves, which is very funny. But then we get this scene with Andrade and Rohan, where Rohan's bathing and Andrade is standing over him and is like, "What do you think you're doing?" Like, she's saying, I'm like, "Do you really think you can pull this off? Like, we'll see if you can pull this off." And then, like, she's like mentioned, she's like, "You're gonna blink your big blue eyes at Rolstra and try to convince him that you're a fool," she says to him, which is a very funny line. I enjoyed that line a lot. But she basically is like, "Okay, like, I wanna get the one over on Rolstra too, so I'm gonna play along with it, but you better treat Sinead well during this time and like don't make her into a fool too." So she's like saying that she's going to support this but kind of reluctantly, and she's also kind of chastising him as well. And in this scene it very much feels more like a mother chastising a child rather than two adults having this conversation that is partially playful and like a little bit sexual, which I do think shows that dichotomy between Che as this ideal male character within this book world and Rohan as being this kind of more virginal character who is seen as like more naive because of his lack of sexual experience, which is kind of interesting.
I took it a little bit differently. I just I thought of it more as like if you're gonna show the same scene back to back to back, you might as well make it different. The last book we had, there was three identical scenes of three different people trying to figure out the power of a magical sword, and they were just all identical, and it was super annoying and boring. But in this book, we have like three scenes back to back of people trying to process Rohan becoming prince and Zaheva dying and like Sinead showing up and like what's that means, and you have three different perspectives of it and like three different scenes, and you get to see the contrast, and it's just like it's a really interesting way of processing the scene in a way that didn't feel repetitive and also in some way was funny in the contrast between the two scenes. I thought it was just really good writing.
I mean, it's a way of showing where each character is at in this moment. It's a way of developing these characters' relationships with each other, but also developing these characters themselves and establishing who they are in this moment. It kind of does feel like a little more slice of life at this moment, even though Zehava like just died. It does feel like it's a pause in the plot, but there's so much work that these scenes are doing to get us to understand who these people are and who they are to each other. So that night, Rohan sends his squire Walvis to get Sinead, and they meet in secret in this grotto that his mother had actually bioengineered. It has a waterfall, and there are all these fruit trees, and it's his favorite place in the entirety of Stronghold. It's a very secluded place, and they discuss their scheme. They do talk about how attracted they are to each other and like how much they're like lusting after each other after just meeting. She kisses him, but before he can like really kiss her back, she does leave.
I think they get interrupted. Just something that like I don't know if we brought up, but is like a real theme in the book is that Sinead is like immediately in love with Rohan to the point where like she's willing to do anything for him and is
Yeah.
really conflicted even this early in the relationship about how strong her feelings are and what that means to her that she's so willing to like lose herself to the fire that is Rohan.
Yeah, because one of the things that they have to do as sunrunners is they have to be neutral. So sunrunners aren't supposed to take sides. They aren't supposed to fight in armies. And she's like, "Oh, what if I align myself to him? I love him so much, even though she doesn't really know him, that I would do anything for him. If he asked me to use my powers against someone else, I would," kind of thing. And she's like this immediately, which is in direct opposition to the vows that she's made as a sunrunner. After this, we cut to Ralstra, who is holding a council meeting, which is not important. What's important is that Pilila is set to meet Krigo after this council meeting to transmit a message without Ralstra knowing, which is something that she has been doing for a while now because she controls his supply of Drana. So he actually is more loyal to her. But while she's waiting to meet up with Krigo in secret, Pensala finds her and tells her that she wants to be Rohan's bride and that she knows that Palila has killed the other escorts. So she's blackmailing Palila so that Palila will say to Rolstra that will like put her name forward to Rolstra as Rohan's bride instead of Ianthe. And she says if she does this, also, she'll make sure that she has a son because instead of switching her son out so that she has a baby girl, which is what she was planning with Ianthe before, she's saying, I will switch out if you have a baby girl with a son of someone else, so it'll look like you have a son. Yeah. Krigo does overhear this. He runs back to his room. And then we're back at Stronghold. They perform the funeral rite for Zehava, and Rohan also performs the same ritual that they perform for Zehava, where they like pour sand over the body, they pour water on the body, they, all this stuff. He performs the ritual for the dragon as well, which is something that he told his father he was going to do, and his father was like, "Ha, I love it." Because he's like, your ashes will mix and then you'll dance, your ashes will like dance across the desert forever. And Zehava, when he was dying, was like, that sounds great, I love that. And like people are a little bit shocked that he's doing this ritual, like, honoring this dragon as well, but they kind of just accept it. And then they light these funeral pyres. They have to stand visual like kind of all night, it seems, or until the pyres burn down. And while they're doing this, they're surrounded by a circle of sunrunners, and the sunrunners weave this like beautiful weaving of light that you can only see if you have the gift. And they're basically weaving this message that they're sending to every single other sunrunner to announce that he is dead. And they're using the light of the pyre in order to do this, which is a really cool mechanic, and I really liked that. Tobin, this is the first time that she's been able to like kind of acknowledge that this is happening, and she is really entranced by this weaving and is like flying, and so she's experiencing like what it's like to kind of create this channel and like traverse these vast landscapes in like a moment. So she's like flying over the landscape and she's like, oh, it's so beautiful. But in this process, she kind of loses herself and she does almost become shadow lost. And shadow lost is when you kind of enter the light and are disconnected from your body. And once you're disconnected from your body, you can't reconnect back to it. Thankfully, Andrade and Sinead are able to bring her back into her body. So she's okay. But Sinead does kind of blame herself because she's like, well, if Andrade didn't have to send that message in the first place, then Tobin wouldn't have even known that she had this power. So she starts studying with Urival, who is the Sunrunner at Stronghold, who again is the guy who she like doesn't know she had sex with, but like had sex with in that sex ritual. And they do have this kind of paternal relation. He has this paternal relationship with her where he feels like a father figure. And like Andrade even like accuses him of being too sentimental with her. It's just like kind of weird. But she basically is able to convince Urival to train her in the seventh and eighth ring. So up to this point, Sinead has the 6 rings. He agrees to teach her the seventh and the eighth ring powers, which is kind of unclear what those really are, but whatever.
Yeah, the rings are unclear except for the first one, which is fire.
Though Tobin has her first ring and she doesn't ever do fire, she's able to like kind of astral project. So I don't know that it's the same thing for every person. I think it's like if you have one power, then you get one ring. It's confusing.
I think the rings are vibes that don't make any sense.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe she can use fire and we just didn't know, and we just don't see it.
She just doesn't use it because none of the witches use any of their powers in an interesting way. Sorry. Spoilers related to the book.
Yeah, Rohan, in a later scene while, like, plotting about with Che and Tobin concerning the Riala, Tobin mentions that Sunrunners are all trained in the arts of love, because she's trying she's not in on this whole thing about how Rohan's like, "Oh, no, I am gonna marry," he hasn't told her that he is gonna marry her. I think this is her saying, like, "You should be into her, like, she knows how to please a man," or something. She's trying to help Sinead because she likes Sinead a lot. But this does the opposite, and Rohan really feels like he's underskilled and is embarrassed by his lack of sexual experience. And he does kind of twist himself into knots in a really funny way. That's like very much like what a 21-year-old virgin would probably do, where he's like, I'll just have sex with like a random woman and then I'll be fine. And then he's like, well, he like talks himself back out of it where he's like, well, all the pretty ones, they already have like a boyfriend. And I don't want to like break that up by trying to like make a pass at any of them. That would be rude. And I don't want to do that. But all the ones who like don't have a boyfriend or don't have any commitments, they're uggos. And I'm a prince and I don't want to be with an uggo. So I'm just not going to have sex with anybody. It's kind of like silly the way he like,
It's very much like a 20-year-old boy.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like it's kinda shitty because
yeah.
he's, in some ways slut shaming.
And not only slut shaming, but he's, like, being really, really reductive with him, like, saying, like, "Well, if they're pretty, they're taken, and if they're not pretty, they're ugly, so, like, why would I want an ugly girl?"
He's being shitty, but he's like it's like, yes, this is a 21-year-old boy, you know?
It's realistic in some ways, I think. Not that all 21-year-old boys are like that, I'm not saying that, but it's something that, like, an immature person would how they would rationalize a situation. Because what he actually doesn't wanna do is he doesn't wanna have sex with someone he doesn't care about, and he cares about Sinead. Like, that's what he's actually experiencing, and he doesn't understand that's what he's experiencing, which is, like, in a way, kinda sweet, but also he's, like, dealing with it in the most shitty way. And I think that, like, there is also a moment where he's like, "I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna research this," which is, like, also very funny, where he's like, "I have this huge ass library. Why am I not just, like, reading about sex?" Which is I don't know, I think that makes sense for his character. But while he's doing that, he has this, like, feeling that all of the female dragons are leaving their nesting site, and it's, described in the book that he doesn't know how he knows that, but he knows that they've left, and the female dragons, after they lay their eggs, they build up this wall of clay at the opening of the caves where they laid their eggs, and then they protect them while they're incubating, and then right before they hatch, all the female dragons leave. And once they leave, this is the signal of what's called the hatchling hunt, which is when all the vassals come together and they go to where the hatchlings are about to hatch, and they basically, and this is the animal abuse trigger, they kill the hatchlings as they emerge from the caves. And it's a way of controlling that dragon population because they're killing these dragons before they become really dangerous. Rohan has never actually had to do this before because he hasn't been the leader of the stronghold, but now that he is a leader, he has to lead this hatchling hunt. And he hates that because he loves dragons and he doesn't want to kill them again. Oh, also, after he killed that big dragon, after his father died, he vowed to never kill another dragon because he hated it so much. He also, like, as they were leaving, all of the female dragons started mourning. They were like singing and mourning, and he was really disturbed by the fact that they like knew to do that. So it was like a really disturbing experience to him to kill that dragon. And he is like really upset and ruffled by the fact that he has to then lead this hatchling hunt. So they travel to the hatching site, and some of the caves have already emptied, which means the dragons have flown. And he's really happy about that. But the vassals rush to the ones that are still closed. And it's dangerous to open up the cave yourself because when dragons are born, they're able to breathe fire, and they breathe fire to like help harden and strengthen their wings. But then they do lose the ability to breathe fire as they age. So what you do is you wait for the dragons to break through the clay wall and then you kill them. And he's in a sour mood because of this, but also because he feels like he's less sexually experienced than Sinead. And he does snap at Sinead and Andrede while they're waiting during this hatchling hunt. He basically accuses Andrede of running a whorehouse and and like Sinead as like being a whore, which is not great. But Sinead then spots Tobin's twins trying to climb down into one of the hatchling sites and are standing near a baby dragon. And she and Rohan then rush to help. Sinead casts a wall of fire between the dragon and the boys. Then Rohan like slaps the baby dragon's butt with the flat of his blade and it flies away. And they're able to get the boys down. They then go back. They're in the cave alone. The twins are now in safety and they're inspecting the cave. And they kind of have this conversation about how dragon eggs are lined with gold.
Yeah, and that maybe the breathing fire causes them to turn into gold. Either way, dragon eggs equal gold, which is
Important
an
later.
interesting. Yeah, it's important later, but it's just also like an interesting take on like the dragon horde,
Yeah.
which I thought was cute. Just another cute way of doing with stuff with dragons.
Yeah, and they're not sure. Because like Sinead's like, this can't be real gold, right? And he's like, I'm not sure. And he like puts some in his like water skin and he's like, I'll test it in my lab. We do learn that he has like a complete dragon skeleton that he's put together piece by piece by collecting different bones in at different times because he is like this like kind of mini naturalist. Anyway, their conversation does devolve because they argue about Sinead's sexual history. Because it's like, how many men have you been with? And
She's
he's
a
really,
little bit like, "How many women have you been with? I don't ask you." And he's like, "Oh, she doesn't know I'm a virgin."
yeah. I actually really like the way she responded. She's basically like, this seems like a you problem and not a me problem. So Sinead says, do you expect me to be ashamed? It's something that happened and doesn't have anything to do with us. And he asks, how many, Sinead? And she gasps, how dare you, she says. You have no right to ask me that, as if every man in the goddess keep had been through my bed. I never asked you about your women, did I? He's startled. What are you talking about? And he's asking them because he actually has not been with anybody. She doesn't realize that. And she says, don't you think I haven't wondered how many? She says that he doesn't like kiss like a virgin, which is a very funny thing to say. She then says, it was one night, part of my training as a sunrunner, that happened before I had ever seen you in the fire. She took a step closer, glaring at him. Do you think I'd try to father another man's child on you? Is this the real reason you're waiting so long before marrying me? How dare you ask how many? How many has it been for you? But I promise you, my lord prince, there will never be another woman once you become mine. I may not have the right to question your past, but your future is mine. So she's basically saying, like, the past is in the past. It doesn't matter because we're committing to each other in the future, which I think is like a good response.
Yeah.
Her telling him that he better get used to her being the person that he's with actually really calms him down. He's like, oh, like she is committed to me. And he chills out after this about them, which is also nice. And I think that it kind of shows like where his anxiety actually was lying, which was that he was afraid she was expecting him to be really experienced when she isn't. And she basically confirms to him that she doesn't think he's a virgin. Where he's like, oh, she thinks I am experienced, which is like such a 20-year-old thing to worry about.
They talk and they get over their problems, which I think is lovely and great.
Yeah, they have a conversation, imagine that. They communicate with each other. They go back to Stronghold, and Millar gives Sinead a dress. She kind of calms Sinead down because Sinead's still pretty angry about what happened. And she's like, I don't want to come to dinner. And Millar's like, come to dinner.
Yeah, Malar like tricks Sinead into first off like talking to her because she wasn't supposed to see anyone, and then Malar shows up and she's like, ah, yes, yes, come, princess, come sit down. And then like Malar makes her talk for a while. Once again, you see how smart Malar is. Where like
Yeah, Millar's great. I really like her character.
she's so good. So like Sinead's talking for a while and she's going through it, and then Sinead realizes the exact moment she calms down, realizes that Malar also recognizes the exact moment she
Yeah.
calms down, and Sinead realized that like this is why Malar got her talking, and it just level 10 emotional IQ jujitsu stuff.
Yeah. Millar is really emotionally intelligent. So she gives her a dress and she's like, come down to dinner. Rohan also dresses to impress at this dinner. He's like wearing this black tunic that's tucked into like tight pants. He's wearing like a little earring. And he makes this kind of grand entrance. And it does seem like he's a little miffed that Sinead is not there yet. because I think he was trying to like impress her with his looks, but it doesn't work because she's not there yet. And his sister kind of makes a comment about it. She's like, "You look good, but you might have too many accessories." And then Sinead comes in and she's also really beautiful. And he's like, and as she comes down the hall and comes up to sit, he stands and he thanks her in front of all of the vassals. And he gives her this gold and emerald ring that he had been wearing as a thanks for saving the twin. And giving a Sunrunner a ring is not really done. And so Andrade like balks at it. She's like, "Oh, how could he do that?" Because the rings are so important to showing their status and what level of Sunrunner they're at. This ring also might have a magical property, but it's not ever really explained what exactly the magic is that is part.
They talk fire coming out of it, like
Yeah.
capital F fire, but yeah, they're like, it's maybe a magic ring. Doesn't explain.
Yeah, I assume that in like a later book it's explained. But then during dinner, and Andrade's like, she hasn't proven herself to be worthy of the seventh ring yet. But then during dinner, Sinead notices that the wine steward is communing through a Sunrunner channel and kind of, grabs him, and she's able to reveal that Ralstra is spying on them through this person who has that Faraday gift. And she's able to break the connection, but she's not able to see who exactly the Sunrunner was on the other side of the channel was. Unfortunately, in breaking the connection, the wine steward does become shadow lost, so he's dead, which Sinead really blames herself for because she killed someone. Sunrunners are not supposed to kill people with their powers. It's a vow that they have to make. This is said over and over again that they're not allowed to kill people, which no one's allowed to kill people.
They talk about legal ways to kill people in this book. That is like a comment.
Yeah, but like, no, you can't just like kill someone for no reason ever, anywhere. This is like a thing in a lot of books where they're like, "Oh, I can't kill with my power. I can't use my powers to kill." It's like you couldn't use a knife to kill either, unless you're in the army and you're fighting a group, like another army.
It's it's a novel where there's going to be fighting, like, and people are going to die, and princedoms are going to change and move and whatever. And it's just they talk a lot about how, like, where does her loyalty lie? Does it lie to the goddess, or does it lie to the princedom
Yeah.
that she's marrying into? And princes can murder legally, but like sunrunners can't. And she goes back and forth for a while on it, and it's like, where does my loyalty lie? Does it lie to the princedom or to the sunrunner? It's a little tedious, to be honest.
It's a weak spot in the book, definitely. But her doing this does mean that she actually has earned her seventh ring. So, congratulations, Sinead. Then we get to part 2 of the book,
Ooh.
which is at the Riala. So they make their way to this city called Weiss in a large procession. We learn that Kamigwen and Osval are very useful as household staff. Right before they reach Weiss, the night before, Rohan is also almost assassinated by a glass blade, and the Merida are the ones who use these glass blades, so he knows it's a Merida attack, and he's like, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. And he just hides the blade. So they get there. The next day, Ralstra arrives on a barge, and everyone lines the river to come see him as he arrives, and they have to bow to him. But Rohan purposefully arrives late so that he doesn't have to bow, and he like plays the fool. He like is like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, cousin, I'm late," because they think they're distant cousins because they call each other cousin, which makes this whole next section of the book really weird. And he then looks at all his daughters and he's like, "Whoa, your daughters are so gorgeous." And he just acts like this little buffoon. And Royal Stra's kind of like, "Okay, this is who I'm dealing with, an idiot," and takes him for face value. Andrade thinks that this is absolutely hilarious.
People are like coughing to hide the fact that they're laughing. It's like a weird scene.
Yeah, it's a weird scene. Then the next day, Tobin, Sinead, and Camiguen go shopping, and we get a whole sequence of them going through all the stalls, shopping, finding toys for Tobin's sons, and Camiguen gets like a lute for Osval. There's a scene where like Sinead's looking at this doll, and she's like, "Oh, it'd be so nice to have a child, to have a daughter that I could give this to, but I don't have anybody." And Tobin's like, "Well, you could get it now, and then if you have a daughter, you could give it to her." And Sinead's like, "No, no, I don't want to do that," which is kind of foreshadowing for later in the book. Aanthe and Pensala do appear. They're very mean to Sinead. Camigwen's not here at this point. They kind of basically say, that Sinead like, Rohan would never choose her because look at her, and I don't know, they just, like, are very mean to each other, they're very middle school girl kind of mean. And then they leave, and Tobin's like, "Are you okay?" to Sinead, and Sinead's like, "Pfft, I'm fine. Those 2 are virgins, so I don't have any competition," which is a really weird thing to say.
I mean, Sinead has like a lot of power and a lot of agency, and it's pretty much implied that like all of Rolster's daughters just sort of sit in a dark room and like wait for a man to look at them. So like I get where Sinead's coming from.
Yeah, but she could have said that, and I think she kinda does, but she also is like, "Also, they're virgins." It's like, "Girl, you've had sex one time. It's not that doesn't mean you're experienced," but this book seems to think if you've had sex one time, you're really experienced and you know exactly what to do when you have sex. So she decides to seduce Rohan. She's like, I'm gonna just seduce him because these 2 girls are not gonna be able to because they don't know how to have sex, but I do. So I'm gonna seduce this guy." And so then they, like, go on this shopping montage where she buys her tools of seduction, which is so weird. She doesn't actually ever use them.
Yeah, this whole scene is of just like Sinead. Now that she's mad and now that she's decided to be hot, she's been wearing like pretty basic clothes without any jewelry. She only brought like 3 outfits or something, and there's gonna be like 5 days. So she'll have to like rewear some outfits, and everyone's like, "Oh my god, no, you should be a princess. You should dress nice." So like as revenge, she buys this like really beautiful bejeweled fabric and is like, "Make me a dress." And like the whole plan is like at the end of the Riala, she's gonna like show up in this hot dress with Rowan on her arms, and it's gonna be like, "Bitch, I won."
Yeah, but so she uses the dress, and she does like Rohan mentions to her, he's like, "You're going to I'm gonna appear with you on my arm on the last night of the Riala, and you're gonna be dripping with emeralds." And he kinda, like, paints this scene for her like a while back. But she also buys these, like, blue goblets and these blue candles. She doesn't use those, and those are, like and, like, this expensive wine that she buys, and she, like, talks about this Faraday, like, secret seduction technique that you only learn once you get, like, your 7th and 8th ring, so it's not just, like it seems like it's, like, a magic thing, but it never comes up again, so it's not important. I thought it was gonna come up again because she, like, explicitly says, like, the guy has to consent for this magic to actually work, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting, like, consent is coming into play." Oh, does it?
Sorry. Yeah, I honestly I don't remember this at all, so that shows you how important it was to the book.
It wasn't. It didn't need to happen at all. I mean, I'm talking about it for a while. So we're gonna move on. Rolstra, meets with Palila, and Palila at this point is very, very, very pregnant. He also meets with it's him a meeting with him and his daughters, and they're kind of plotting to discuss how they're going to get one of them to marry Rohan. They also discuss Sinead a little bit, but Rolstra is really not interested in pregnant women. He is kind of repulsed by Palila's pregnancy because he's evil. So, and Palila knows this. So she's like trying to dress in a way to kind of not cover her pregnancy, but like make it look less obvious. And she's trying to, but like he even like comments that her fingers have swollen from the pregnancy and he hates how like her fingers look. So there's just like nothing she can really do.
Yeah, it told multiple times that Rolster likes real thin
Yeah,
women,
stringy women.
which is gross.
Yeah, he's gross. Sinead is also, like, really, really skinny. She's, like, pretty, what's the like, lanky, kind of almost? It's kind of
Wayfish.
yeah, it's not described as lanky, but, like, it in so many words, it's described as lanky, like, she's very, very tall, she's very, very thin, and it's never described in a way that's like, she is better than these other women because she's taller and thinner, which is nice, which is also very nice, like, none of the women are described in a way that's like, this one is prettier than this one because they have this specific body type, and, like, I think Rohan even says that, like, he's talking about how he would be tempted by Aanthe and Pensala if he wasn't already, like, committed to Sinead, but he's, like, in love with her, so he's, like, not tempted by Aanthe and Pensala at all. So he's, like he recognizes these other women's beauty, but it's just, like, because of his emotional connection to Sinead, he's not, um, tempted or, like, he's not, like, feeling I don't know how to really describe it.
Sinead's described as beautiful a lot, but it is actually a
Like a rougher beauty.
yeah, a rougher beauty in that it's not just her beauty that's attractive, it's her personality and her brains, which is something that Ianthe and Pansali, even though they're, like, maybe prettier, like, don't have.
And it's specifically like her, which I feel like if this was described by a different author, you'd be like, ugh. But the way that Melanie Rawn describes it does really make it feel like it is that importance of that emotional connection that Rohan has that he doesn't feel with these other people. Anyway, Rolstra has this kind of moment where he's disgusted by Palila's pregnancy, even though he's the one who made her pregnant. And even though Palila also hates being pregnant, she does not want to be pregnant. She just is because she feels like she needs to be for her position to be secure in his court. While like that's happening, Rohan is meeting with different people throughout the day. He's playing the fool throughout the entire day, trying to get people to put their guard down because he is trying to play them so that he comes out on top with a lot of these deals. He finds it very exhausting to do this, but he will continue.
I mean, it does seem to be working. He talks about how they're getting better treaties, and they're also part of the reason he's getting better treaties is because they think that Rohan's about to become Rolstra's, like, son-in-law, so, like, the ploy is working, and they do specifically it's working in the way he wants, so.
Yeah, I mean, it's working. He's like successful. Che recognizes that he's acting weird and he's like, all right, you just need to tell me what's going on. We need to talk about it. So he does confide in Che. Then he's walking along a river at night, the river, and another glass blade almost kills him, but it's intercepted by a sunrunner who was sent to secretly guard him. And it does cut him, this other sunrunner, but he's okay. He mentions that it's good that it's a glass blade because if it was a steel blade, steel piercing Faraday flesh makes them lose control of their powers. And I thought that this was going to come up later in the book, and it never does.
I forgot about it until this moment. I do have to say this is also kind of a funny scene where, like, Rohan's having, like, a normal conversation, and then Meath just, like, throws him to the ground and sprints away.
Yeah,
And he's like, "What the heck?" And then, like, Meath, like, takes out a dude or something.
he takes out, yeah, he kills the guy, which like, or does he? Yeah, I think he does kill the guy, but he's also a sunrunner, but he doesn't use his powers to kill the guy. Or is Meath a sunrunner? No, he is because he said the thing about the steel. Wait, yeah, how does that work?
I don't know.
All right. Well, anyway, that happens. It is a funny scene. And like they're kind of all unruffled by it. They're like, whatever. This is my second assassination attempt in so many days, but it didn't work out. So,
Yeah, Jay's, like, a little bit cross that Rohan has not brought up the fact that, like, there's multiple attempts on his life, and he's like, "You know, if they really wanted to kill me, they would kill me."
yeah, he's annoyed that Rohan didn't bring it up, not that it happened. He's like, well, why didn't you tell me? Like, you're keeping so many things from me these days. We've grown apart, you and I. All right, the next day, the horse races happen, which is what Che really likes because Che breeds horses, and it's like basically him show. It's like a huge advertisement for all of his horses, which are described in the book as just being like so far above everybody else's horses that he just makes a killing at the Riala every time because people just like they want to buy only his horses because his horses win every single race.
They're all the best boys, and they're all the best at everything, and,
Yeah.
like, all of their plans go right the way they want them, at least in the beginning. The races are just, like, another way for Che to, like, dominate completely, which he does,
He
you know?
does, yeah. The rewards for the course races for the people who win are gemstones, like a pot of gemstones. And Rohan is specifically in a race, which is apparently like unheard of that a prince would actually race in one of the races. So people are like all a titter because he's racing in the race, but he is in a race where if he wins, he will win this like pot of emeralds, which he's like really excited about because he wants to make like all this emerald jewelry for Sinead because Sinead has like green eyes and red hair and he's like it'll look gorgeous on you. Everyone will be jealous. And he's like super dramatic and he wants that. While this is happening, Sinead makes a wager with Ianthe and Pansala that Rohan isn't going to choose either of them. She's like, he's not going to choose either of you. I'm going to bet my green emerald ring for it. So Rohan competes in this race and it's a pretty long race. It goes through a like a forest and up a hill and he is attacked by another Merida who is posing as another rider in the race.
This race so confusing, I have to say, like, every other, like, scene, I felt like I really understood the geography of it and where
Yeah.
people were going, and they're like, "It's a race, and now we're in a forest, and people are getting smacked by trees and, like, getting knocked off horses," and I'm like, "What? Did they not see the trees before? What's happening?"
Well, I think the point is that they had to, like I don't know, I think it was, like, partially an agility course, but it was unclear. It felt like and maybe it's because, like, Rohan is having to like, it's in well, because it's also partially in Sinead's, like, perspective, because she's using her Sunrunner ability to kind of follow along with the race, after they're out of sight.
And it's the 7th race in the series, so
Well, I
they've
don't
been
think all of the races go through this route. I think
well,
this
that's
is,
why it was
like, a longer route.
confusing. 'Cause
Okay.
all of a sudden we're in a different ra anyway, this scene was confusing.
The Merida almost, like, gets him a few times, and Sinead sees this and is like, "Uh-uh." And then she uses her Sunrunner power to summon this vision of the dragon only for the Merida guy, so he sees the dragon, but no one else sees the dragon, but it scares him so much that he does fall off his horse and breaks his neck. And this is another person that Sinead has killed kind of using her Sunrunner powers to protect Rohan specifically, and she feels really, really conflicted by it again. So that night, while she's thinking about it, she's walking beside the river and she's trying to parse through her feelings about where her loyalties lie, and Rolstra appears. He kind of propositions her. He's like, "Be my Sunrunner." And she's like, "No." And he's like, "Be my bedmate." And she's like, "Mm, no." But she it's in her perspective, and she's, like, really turned on by him.
Super confusing.
It's weird. Yeah. She's like, "He's really hot," even though he's, like, 50, which, like, not that 50-year-olds can't be hot, but she's 21, and she is really, like honestly, he's not doing anything. He's not, like, doing anything that's, like, overt. He's just, like, talking to her, and she's like, "Whoa, this guy is really hot." It's bizarre to me how sexy she finds this man, but he leaves. While this is happening, Riante sneaks into Rohan's tent. Rohan's, like, pretty drunk at this point, and he's lying in his bed, and she tries to seduce him. At first, he thinks it's Sinead, and he's, like, welcoming it, but then he realizes that it is Iante, and he kicks her out. He's like, "Leave! Stop doing this!" And she's like, "No, like, you have to hide me," but then she doesn't hide at all. And he realizes that she, like, wants them to get caught because then it would be really hard for him to deny marrying her.
Yeah, so at first he can't see her, and then all of a sudden a fire gets set in his tent,
Or it's outside his tent,
mysteriously,
but yeah.
outside the tent, yeah, and then he's like, "Ah, it's Iante. Ah, you have to leave," and then she's like, "No."
But he does get her to leave, and thankfully the fire distracts everybody so no one sees her leave his tent, and he realizes because the grass isn't singed after the fire miraculously is put out, that it was summoned fire and it wasn't real fire, and Sinead had created this fire to protect him, and he is very thankful of that. The next day, Palila and Pansala meet, and they basically discuss that Aante blew her chance. They're like, "She really messed up." And then they scheme together. Rohan, during this time, it's raining, so everyone's, like, inside. Rohan meets Sinead under this bridge, and they, like, cuddle, and he tells her that he loves her. They have more talks. After they finish, Andrade is the person who's in charge of overseeing, like, sealing all of the agreements and, like, witnessing all the agreements because she is supposed to be, as the leader of the Goddess Keep, this impartial party. And she is, like, looking over them, and she's really impressed by what Rohan was able to get. He was able to get all of these things in his favor. One of the things that he really wanted to do was to confirm the borders of every princedom, and he was able to get everyone to agree to that based on the maps that are in the Goddess Keep. And, like, the sun runners are able to kind of fly over the landscape with their vision, so they're able to really see an accurate portrayal of the landscape. So it makes that division of land very easy.
It's also like a process that gets started.
Yeah, it doesn't happen during this, but they agree to it during this.
Yeah, they introduce a sort of island prince whose name escapes me, who,
Yeah. I don't
is
remember
like
his name either.
he's important to the plot because he shows up later.
His name is like Lel or something.
There's 2, there's like a Lil,
And then
and
there's
then
like
there's like
yeah,
a Lin or
yeah,
something.
yeah, I don't know which one's which.
There's too many, like, unimportant princes in this book, and they're not important, so we're not gonna go over the names, but he's kind of like an old dude,
Yeah.
and he's like
He's blind in one eye?
I think so, and he's like and he flirts with, like, Tobin, but, like, in a way that's, like, cute and
Yeah, like an old man, like, in a way that, like, he's just, like, not
being
being
kind.
being kind,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, he's because he lives on an island, everyone's like, "You pick the borders, cause you know what's up, cause it's an island," and he's like, "Yep, I got my island, I don't, like, care about other
Yeah.
stuff." So he, like, starts up a friendship with Rohan, cause he also can, like, kinda see through him.
Yeah, he knows what's up.
He's a cool character who's, like, not that important.
Yeah. Another one of the agreements is this defense agreement where if one ruler's lands are attacked, all the other rulers have the right and the obligation to defend the princedom that was attacked. So if a border is crossed in violence, all of the other princedoms are morally obligated to defend that princedom against the attacker. Rolstra, as Andrade is doing this, comes to talk to her and says that he needs a new Sunrunner, and he says he wants Sinead, and Andrade refuses. So he decides that he wants to just he was like, "Well, I'll just get her addicted to Dranath as well, so I'll just do that." And he's kind of doing that because he's like, Kriego's reached the end of his usefulness, and he wants to sleep with Sinead as well. Rohan that night hosts a feast and he gets pretty drunk. He dances with everybody except for Sinead, who does leave. Aanthe does proposition him again, but he refuses. And while he goes to get wine, he realizes that Aanthe has left as well. Sinead is also drunk. She's kind of wandering through the tents and she sees Aanthe and she decides to follow Aanthe because she wants to continue to kind of taunt her and show her superiority over Aanthe, which is really weird. Like, why would you do that? I guess she's a mean drunk.
She's, like, kind of I don't know, Sinead is, like, really petty when it
She is pretty
comes to
petty.
Rohan
Yeah.
and, like, is unhappy that she can't just be, like, the main girl and, like, show herself off.
It's weird. We learn that this is kind of a ruse that Aanthe and Rolstra have set up together, that Aanthe purposefully kind of leaves where Sinead is gonna follow her, and then it leads Sinead to Raelstra, and he follows, and then he kind of comes upon her. During this time, Palila realizes that Raelstra is trying what he's trying to do. He's like, "Oh, she's gonna be his next mistress, and he's gonna replace Kriego with her." And she runs to Kriego and gives him some Dranoth, but she accidentally gives him too much, and he, like, realizes that he's dying, but before he dies and becomes shadow lost, he does warn Andrade what Rolstra is doing. Urival, on the orders of Andrade, rushes to tell Rohan what happened, and then they run to Raelstra's camp. Uh, Urival is able to just get through all of the guards because of his rank at the Goddess Keep. I think he has 9 rings, so he just has to hold up his hands and show the rings, and then they let him pass without any questions asked, which again shows that power that these people have as this, like, kind of neutral force, even though they're anything but neutral in most of these situations. And so they are able to get outside of Rolster's tent where he has tied up Rohan Squire Walvis, and he's like yelling at him, he's like, "My master's never gonna let you get away from the," he's like 12 or something.
Such a weirdly comical scene for something that is so dark.
And like, yeah, like really scary.
Because you, like, walk up, the squire is like, "My master's gonna come get you," and he's like, "I'm gonna blah, blah, blah," and then Sinead is like, "No, it's like, you're never gonna," and they're, like, going back and
Like
forth while, like,
slaps the
well
kid and like
yeah,
and Sinead's also like, "What did you put in the wine? I feel really weird." Like she's acknowledging that there's something in the drink that he gave her, that he drugged her. And, like, he's like yeah, it's, like, obvious that he's threatening to rape Sinead.
it's just they keep going, like, back and forth in, like, this weird slapstick thing where they, like, they're trying to distract the villain by monologuing, but,
Yeah.
like, he's trying to, like, rape her and then, like, drug her. It's just a very weird scene.
It is a really weird scene, but Rohan comes into the tent, and he draws a knife on Ralstra, and Ralstra's like, "You drew a knife on me, this means I can kill you with impunity." They fight. Ralstra loses because of a boot knife that Rohan's able to pull, but Rohan, like, almost loses in this fight. He also is not wearing a shirt again. He, like, takes off his shirt when Yuraval comes, and he's like, "No time for the shirt," and he, like, immediately runs. So this is another scene where he just, like, for no reason doesn't have a shirt on. But Rolster does lose this fight, but and he gets, like, his hand gets cut by Rohan, but Rohan decides not to kill him. Rohan monologues at him for, like, a while after this, and it's like, "Your girl is, like, tied to a bed, like, shouldn't you get out of there and, like, get her some help?" He does then threaten him, and then he leaves, and he carries Sinead down to the river.
He's like, "And never touch my wife!" And
Yeah,
everyone's like, "My wife?"
my
And
wife.
Rolster's like, yeah. And then Rolster's like, "Oh, his wife, I'm gonna get him, I'm gonna get him."
Yeah, and he's like,
And
"Oh, this
Sinead's
was a
like,
plan all along. You always wanted to marry Sinead." It's like, yeah, he wasn't subtle.
it's yeah, it's the tone of, like, this chapter is so much different than the next part, which is about to come up,
The
and
next
I
part is
just
awful. Not
it's
not this
so
not this immediate next part, but, like, you'll see.
yeah, we'll talk about part 3 in a minute.
Yeah, so Rohan takes Sinead down by the river. They're under this willow tree, so they're secluded. And she says that she was drugged and then gets super turned on, which again is a side effect of this drug. And I do not think that I just never brought up again. And she's just like, "I wanna fuck you." And he is like, "Oh, but wait, like, I actually am a virgin." And she's like, "It does feel like the first time, doesn't it?" And he's like, "No, no, no, like, it is the first time for me." And she's like, "Uh-huh, it does feel like that." And then it nicely fades to black, and we don't have to actually see them have sex, but they have sex below this tree.
They have fun and it's great.
It's fun, and it's great, and it's consensual, and it's sweet.
Well, sort of, she's drugged, but yeah.
She's drugged,
Yeah,
yeah, who knows? She initiates at least. I don't know. There's still some consent questions there, but it's
previous consent, you know.
yeah, yeah, but they look upon it with both with, like, happy memories later, so it's yeah, so anyway, but it's, like, a good experience for both of them at least, so it's fine. We
Yeah.
don't we don't see it. They wake up the next day, like, they squished a bunch of berries underneath their bodies, so they're, like, covered in juice, but they're happy. Meanwhile, while they're dealing with, like, the afterglow, Palila goes into labor, and Ianthe arrives and reveals her evil plot, and she's like, "Ha ha ha, I induced your labor, and I'm going to switch your baby with one of the girl babies if it's a boy because I brought 5 other pregnant women and I induced all of them into labor, and I'm going to destroy you." So she reveals that she's just so evil. And Pelly was like, "Oh, fuck," and she's really scared. While this is happening, Andrade is summoned. She's called to assist because this is kind of part of her duties as, like, this medical professional, but is really confused and confounded, partially because all of this is happening on a barge, which is on the water, so she's having that sunrunner reaction to being on the water. But by the time she gets there, Palila has already given birth. And when Andrade arrives, Palila's like, "I gave birth to a healthy baby boy." But she hasn't actually seen her child yet. And Ayanthe is standing on the upper deck of the ship holding a baby. And when Rolster arrives, Ayanthe says to him, "Look at your new daughter," and holds
Well, Andrade is also shown she's shown all of the other pregnant women in the basement. She's like, "If I wasn't so nauseous from this boat, I might be able to figure out what's going on.
yeah.
I don't know why all 5 of these people are giving birth at the same time, but it's weird and I'm just here to help."
L6 really, because I think there are 5.
I thought it was 4 servants,
Oh,
but I
maybe.
don't think
There are a lot of babies happening.
there's a lot of babies happening.
And, like, two of them have already given birth, but they both have given birth to girls.
Um,
And they're like and the other 2 were, like, praying that they're gonna give birth to girls too.
I realize that their babies are, like, about they're trying to steal the babies because like, one of the women has, like, had a bunch of sons, and they're like, "That's our best ticket," and she's like, "Don't you fucking take my baby."
Yeah, they're not cued into the whole plan. The way they understand it is, like, if one of us gives birth to a boy, that will be switched with the girl upstairs, but they don't realize that there's a second plot that if she gives birth to a boy and they're gonna switch it with a girl.
Clear what actually happens.
It is unclear what's actually yeah, and it's also unclear, like, what the actual plan was in the first place, but so Ianthe says to Rolstra, "Look at your new daughter," and she holds it up to him and shows him, and as she's doing this, Pansala comes up from the deck and is like, "Ianthe, I have the little baby girl for you," and Rolstra figures it out, and he's like, "This has been a plot to replace my child with another child." So he comes down into the room where Palila has just given birth and demands that they tell them what happened. And Aeanthe betrays Pansala and Palila by, telling him her version of the events.
Plays dumb.
Yeah. This was a really confusing I was very confused by this scene, personally.
It wasn't yeah, I wasn't sure, like, if Ianthe's like, "That's such a stupid plan to switch a lady like, a girl for a boy, because what if you don't have any boys?" And they're like, "Oh, we didn't think about that. We thought we had enough babies." And then, like, Ianthe's like, "Actually, I didn't plan anything." And Pensala's like, "Oh, I've been betrayed." And
Yeah.
Pelea is like, "I've also been betrayed." And, like, Rolstra's like, "All of these people suck and I hate them, but I'm more mad about the fact that I don't have a son than I do about I'm mad about all of this betrayal, but, like, mostly mad about the another daughter."
Yeah, he also finds out that Palila is responsible for Krigo's death, which means that he does have the right to kill her because she killed someone. He says that he wants to kill Pansala as well, but Andrade intervenes and is like, "No, banish her to the Goddess Keep. You owe me that much because she lost a Sunrunner, so she's gaining, like a accolade, I guess, of the Goddess
Yeah,
Keep."
she swoops in and saves Pensala
Yeah,
and the baby, and
yeah.
also reveals that the person she was supposed to marry was Rolstra, and that he, like, came to her at one point, and she knew that he was evil and sucked really hard, so she, like, made it her life's mission to, like, fuck with him. So
Yeah.
they just, like, hate each other and they square off for a little bit, and then she, like, takes the 2 girls, Pensala and the baby, and, like, pieces.
Yeah, and the baby he names Chiana, which means traitor in the, like, old language, and she takes them and leaves. And he rewards Aeanthe for betraying his other daughter.
For lying and cheating. He's like, "You're good at it, congratulations. I don't even care if it was against me."
Yeah, and he's like, "I'm gonna give you control over Pharaoh Keep," which is this keep that's right on the border between his lands and the desert, and it's something that Rohan has, like, really wanted for a while. And but he then is like, "But you can't marry Rohan. He's gonna marry that Sunrunner girl, so you're not gonna get him." And she gets so pissed by this. She's, like, so pissed off. And then he lights the barge on fire, lighting and this is the unfortunately, when someone gets burned alive. He lights Palila, like, on fire and kills her, and it's unclear whether or not all the women who were giving birth in the bottom of the barge were killed or not. And that's the way that scene ends.
So they wake up the next morning and they're like, "Ah, crap, the barge is on fire. That's terrifying." Anyway, the Rial is over and they have that, like,
Mass wedding. Everyone gets married. Cameo marries Aspel, a bunch of other people get married. Sinead is, like, not having fun because she's having all these withdrawal symptoms of the drug, which, like, sucks. But also, I feel like Rohan's like, "She's probably fine," because he feels really triumphant in this instance.
concerned about her and, like, really worried about her and, like, mad that, like, she feels bad, but also, like, they doll her up and put her in her fancy dress and, like, put her in
Yeah.
the emeralds that he won from the horse race and shows her off and everyone's like, "Clap, clap, 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 clap.
Yeah, she feels
Proud of
really
you."
triumphant in this moment because there's this banquet that happens at night. And before they arrive at it, he gives her, like, a circlet, and she puts a circlet on his head too, and she's like, "This is my dream, like, this is the thing that happened in my vision years and years ago, that I'm crowning him." And she's, like, feeling really triumphant, but she also feels like shit because she's dealing with the withdrawal symptoms. So they arrive at this banquet together, which is apparently not done, and everyone's like, "Oh, you shouldn't have done that." But they like to be dramatic. It annoys Rolstra. Everyone else is fine with it. This banquet, like, sounds like it's really cool. There are, like, all these miniatures of all the different keeps made out of spun sugar. And Andrade, like, talks about how accurate they are, so they must have gotten, like, a Sunrunner artist to, like, make them. So it just sounds like it was decorated in a cool way. She also is, like, talking about this is another thing that she mentions and it doesn't come up again. She's like, "I think inbreeding is the reason that some Sunrunners are bad on the water." And I was like, "That's interesting." And then she doesn't it doesn't come up again.
Yeah, they're like, "Hey, they used to not be bad at being on the water because they came from that island." The prince whose name we can't remember, his island used to hold all of the Sunrunners, and then they decided that they wanted to, like, be spread out and become these, like, messenger people, and they're like, "Well, we don't know why that happened, and we don't know." And we're like, Okay. Is this for
Yeah.
the next book? Why?"
I assume it must be, right? There's an interlude afterwards, and all of this happens in summary. So, number 1, Ralstra schemes with both Aeanthe and the Merida on how to fuck over Rohan. Number 2, Sinead and Rohan marry. Congratulations. Lots of children are born, including Tobin having another set of male twins. But Sinead can't have kids. She miscarries a few times. This happens off screen, but it's troublesome for her. Pansala is at the Goddess Keep, and she does show that she is a Faradee. And then a plague happens, and it kills hundreds and hundreds of dragons. And that's the interlude. And then we start part 3 with yet another summary.
It's worth saying that a plague not only happens, it kills people too.
Yeah, well, this is in part 3 is when it kills everybody. But it also happens in summary, so I'm not sure why it isn't just part of the interlude. So the plague then spreads to people. It kills Cammy, Millar, one of Tobin's twins, and then like a bunch of lords and like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dragons. They learn that the drug Dranath is actually the cure. So everyone doses it.
Less a cure and more like something to keep the fever down. It's kind of like a stimulant that, like,
It's like Tamiflu,
yeah, enough strength to, like, make it through.
but it does no one gets addicted to it when they do that.
Yeah, if you do a little bit, it's fine. Like, no one else gets addicted to Dranth in the entire book.
And so it's really expensive, and Ralstra makes like a killing off of selling it because it only is growing on his lands. But Rohan has figured out that the dragons are do have gold in their eggs, so he's able to basically just like print money, and he's able to buy it. And then he also like sprinkles it on the dragons' feeding grounds, so then they're okay too, which is sweet. I like that he did that.
Yeah, it's just this whole sequence is, like, really weird
It is
because
weird. This is where the pacing gets weird, I think.
this is where, like, 2/3 of the plot happen, and it just
Yeah.
starts going quick and a lot of times just in pure exposition.
Yeah.
It really, like, completely shakes up the map because in part 2, we end with, like, Rowan securing all of his land, and then in summary, a bunch of princes die, so it's a bunch of young princes that are in charge of their land, or, like, people who are, like, wives who had, like, been part of marriage pacts with princes
Yeah.
die, so they lose those connections, and then Ralstra gets, like, crazy rich from selling Dranath.
And he also has all these daughters that he can suddenly marry to all of these young princes.
Yeah, so, like, all of a
This
sudden,
power shift happens off screen.
all of the pieces on the board are different. It's, like, interesting, but, like, should have been a different book.
Yeah, I feel like I just didn't want it to happen in summary. But I also didn't need to have a plague happen on screen, so maybe I don't know. I'm both thankful and frustrated by the way that this was paced. Anyway, there's a 6-year time jump, and here we go. And after the 6-year time jump, we are in Aeanthe's perspective, and she's constructing a bed that is completely covered in scenes of dragons mating, and different like panels show different like parts of the mating ritual. And you're like, that can't be good. And she's like really into this bed. She also has 3 sons to 3 different men, which she's really proud of. And she is really proud of her fertility, that she was able to only have sons where her father couldn't have sons. And she's really, really proud of having these sons. And she feels like it makes her really powerful. And she, I think, has like this feeling of like being really powerful because she is able to choose her partners too, even though she isn't tied to them in any way. So she has kind of this thing going on.
Villain monologue. She talks about how, she talks about this earlier in the book too, about how she's learned the true power of hate and
Yeah,
how
I
hate.
have that quote actually.
Oh, you want to read it?
Yeah. So this is when Rolstra says like you can't marry Rohan because the Sunrunner has prior claim. The Sunrunner, Aeanthe whispered. All at once she understood the hatred that lashed the air between her father and Andrade. Fury and wounded pride and the desire for vengeance swept through her, creating a hatred she embraced as if it was a lover. She had been empty her whole life, waiting to be filled with this sweet, hot thing that grew inside her, singing of blood and revenge. And at last she had found her definition of power, not through the princely husband or her father or any other person, power stronger than any paltry gifts of a sunrunner. This thing was what made her father so powerful. He knew how to hate. So she's like filled with hatred and she's fueled by it.
Yeah, she also talks about, like, after she has her sons that, like, the only power a woman has is through her connections to men, and now,
Yeah,
like,
I have that
the
quote
best
too.
connection. Oh, you wanna read that one too?
Yeah, so she's, like, with her sons at this moment, and she's, like, patting them and loving them, and it says, "The path to power for a woman lay in the men she controlled, and she laughed aloud as she played with her son. The land and the castles might become theirs, but they were forever hers." So that's how she thinks about power. Later, we do have this thought from Rohan, which Sinead is having trouble getting pregnant and staying pregnant. She's miscarried multiple times, and the vassals are getting uneasy because they really want him to get an heir.
Yeah, this is, like, literally the next scene is that we're, like,
Yeah.
back at the castle. Everything's, like, great.
Yeah, they're happy, but they can't have kids. They're just having trouble with fertility, and it's really, really frustrating Sinead. It said, his vassals were hinting about his child estate. He was fertile. It was Sinead's inability to carry a child that was the problem. The Aunt Threme honored and respected her. Half the letters from the stronghold bore her signature alone, and by now her authority was firmly established. She had studied desert laws and customs thoroughly. Her decisions were wise and fair when she sat in justice alone during Rohan's absences from stronghold. But the vassals would want the assurance that only a male heir could give. Rohan shrugged in sudden annoyance that verged on anger. It was as if they considered a woman to be worth no more than the son she produced, no matter what else she accomplished and how much she gave. So it's kind of them both saying the same thing, but one is like this internalized idea of where power comes from, and the other is this very frustrated understanding that this is a contrived social norm that is not healthy or correct about where power stems from.
Just good writing, it's a really lovely scene where instead of being like, "She's a good princess, people should like her," you, like, see why she's a good princess, and then also you have this, like, contrasting ideas of what's a good woman, you know? What's a good female leader, like, where does the power come from?
Yeah, and how women see themselves and see their power where their power stems from, and how Ayante has been told her whole life that this is what it's like. So she has this really flawed view herself of what power looks like, which is, like, tragic in a sense. She feels like she has to do this in this way. But moving on, Tobin also has been given the first ring of the Faraday, so she has proven herself to be powerful. And this is when things do start to get really hairy really fast. So Rohan leaves to look at his vassal's estate, so he's kind of touring his vassal's estate. And while he's gone, Sinead sees a vision of her holding a baby, but she is covered in burns. But she's like, "Oh, I am going to have a baby." While she's like thinking about this, Rohan is in Skybowl, which is where all of the dragons are now nesting and is where they have this like gold melting thing happening. So he wants to see the dragons, and the leader of Skybowl takes him to go see them with a few other people. He's there with this child named Tilal, who is Walvis's squire, and Tilal is actually Sinead's nephew, so her brother's son, her brother's youngest son, I think. So he's like little, and he is with Rohan when Rohan like sees these dragons, and he's like really amazed by them, and he's like, they're so beautiful and they're so free. And he's also kind of disturbed by how few of them there are because there are only like 50 of them there and there should be like hundreds. And he, like, one of the dragons takes off and he's on his horse and he starts galloping after it because he's like so excited about these dragons. And then he is attacked and captured by Ayante's men, along with Tilal.
Yeah, he, like, immediately stumbles into a trap.
Yeah, like a knife is thrown and hits him in the shoulder or something.
Yeah, it's a pretty good fight scene as someone who cares about fight scenes, but it is a little bit like people were like, "Are you sure that you're okay being so close to Yante's borders?" And he's like, "It's fine."
Yeah.
Immediately falls into a trap.
Also, like, this is something that I don't really understand because the people who take him to Ayante are working for Ayante, even though one of them is Merida. They're under orders to make it look like it was a Merida attack and not Ayante taking him. But then she immediately after Talal gets there, and like the Merida guy's like, I really hope she doesn't hurt this child. And like once they get there, and like Rohan is like pretty badly injured, like he's hurt in the thigh too, I think.
So yeah, he goes down swinging, gets stabbed in the arm, stabbed in the leg. He tells the boy, the squire is in, and the like lord of Skyball that's like with him to like run. They don't. they get murdered. Their, like, horses wander back with, like, the rest of the party, and that's how they know that they're gone.
One of them gets eaten by a dragon. Like, like, the rest of the party sees one of the horses get picked up by a dragon, and they're like, "What the hell?" And then they realize what happens.
And it's so weird because you're right, they do go back, they, like, follow him, and then they're like, "Oh, no, they took a path that we can't follow, but look, they left a Merida coin or
A
something."
coin, yeah.
Yeah, and then literally, like, the Merida people are like, "Oh, I hope they find that coin and they don't realize that we're going to Ianthe."
But as soon as they get to Ianthe, Ianthe's like, "Run, little boy, tell them that I've taken your master." And he's like, "Oh, fuck." And he leaves, and he's found by this wandering sun runner named Cleve, who was just like, he like wanders around.
Yeah.
And he tells him, he's like, "He's been captured by Ianthe. He's in the keep."
I just like this
I
this
don't get
the
it.
wh there's so many parts in this section that don't make any sense. There's stuff in the other section where they would, like, bring stuff up that wouldn't be relevant to the plot later, but, like, made sense in scene, but literally nothing about what's going on with Farouk and Ianthe that anybody does really makes much
No,
sense.
that anybody does, not just Ianthe. Because you could say like, "Oh, she's starting to kind of like lose her grip on strategic planning because she's being so overcome by this desire," but we'll get to it. And also, the Merida are poised to take Tilgath, which Rolstra and Ianthe are like, "Do not take Tilgath yet. Wait. Wait to take Tilgath." And they're like, "No, we want to take Tilgath." Sinead orders troops to move to Tilgath to help protect it, but her brother appears. Her brother's name is Davi. And he actually tells her, he's like, "Rostra is going to come into your land because Tilgath is on the opposite side of the desert as Rolstra's lands. And so he's going to use that defensive pact to basically like cross through your borders and occupy your land."
He's a lord to a different prince, kinda like Che.
To Jostri, is it Jostri that he's the lord of?
Yeah, it's Jostri, and Jostri's like, "Hey, bring all of your men and horses and stuff. We're gonna go do this." And he's like, "Wait, that's my sister's land that you're gonna do a bunch of finger quotes drills to." And he's like, figures it out and bolts and like brings his. The armies are not big. They're like 2 to 300 people. Yeah,
Yeah, and then there's like a scene later where they kill like 450 people, and that's like half the army.
it's a small group of people, but he shows up and he's like, "Yo, they're gonna it's 2 wars," and everyone's like, "Oh, no, 2 wars."
I do really like the relationship that grows between Dabi and Sinead, but also Dabi and Rohan and Che. Che's always there. Like, you see that he actually is a really loving brother. He just was, like, when he was very young, convinced by his wife. Because you think, like, oh, her brother doesn't care about her, but he actually does care very deeply about Sinead. And his choice to send her to the Goddess Keep was a great choice because she does, like, mention that, like, she felt really sick all the time at River Run because it's on water.
Yeah.
So she, like, was much more comfortable at the Goddess Keep anyway.
'Cause she's taking care of their nephew, and they're very close, like, a very familiar relationship in this book except for
Like
Rolstra.
Rolstras, yeah.
Lovely.
It's really sweet. It's very, like, well-rounded, I feel like. It's complex in a way that's quite lovely. It's yeah, it's very sweet and, like, almost wholesome, and it's weird that that is in this book. Anyway, so he says that, and he's like, "I've brought my army to you." Like, I've basically defected. While this is happening, Rohan is really he's, like, feverish because of the wounds that he's received, and he's been drugged with the Dranoth, and he's having like hallucinations because he's seeing the dragon tapestry paintings, and he is like having these fever dreams where he thinks that he's like in a cave with the dragons, and he's like hiding from them, and he's really scared. And while he's like having these hallucinations and these nightmares, Sinead uses moonlight. So she like weaves the moonlight because she's looking for him, and she's like looking in each of the windows of the castle to try to see which room he's in. She sees him, and she's able to like come up to the edge of the moonlight to look at him, and she sees that Ayanthe has climbed into bed and is like holding him, and she is very sad because she realizes what Ayanthe is trying to do. And she also realizes that the child she saw in that vision is not actually hers, but is Ayanthe's. So then we get to this really, this is the big trigger warning for rape. And this is a scene in the book that both JoJo and I, if we weren't reading it for this podcast, we would have both put the book down.
We had a conversation about how if we ever get to this read a book like
Yeah.
this and we feel this way, we're not gonna do an episode about it. So
Yeah, and it's partially just because the scene is so graphic in its depiction of sexual assault that it was quite disturbing to read. It happens completely on screen and it is long. So basically, what happens is Rohan believes that he is having sex with Sinead
he's
at
like,
first.
yeah, he's having the fever dream about the dragons.
And he thinks that Sinead has come to him and he's like, "Oh, she's so beautiful." And he even is like thinking about how he's so glad that she's the only one he's ever been with, which is heartbreaking. It's just like heartbreaking that he's thinking this. Then he realizes that it's actually Ayante who's he's having sex with. So he like jumps away from her, but like he acknowledges that it's too late. Like he did finish, and she's like laughing at him and like taunting him, and oh, it's just like awful. And he's like, "I hate you," and he's like telling her that he hates her and he wants to kill her. And she's saying like, "Your sunrunner bitch won't be able to give you a son, but I can." And she's talking about like her fertility, and she says to him like, "I'm gonna make sure that I'm pregnant." And she like basically tells him that she's gonna have sex with him multiple times, which puts him into like a rage. Like he becomes enraged and he like jumps on top of her. He starts strangling her. She laughs at him again. It does describe that she like guides him into her. So she's still like an active participant in this act. And then they have sex again and it's awful. And it's awful.
He's miserable. He hates it. He feels like she's making him into a rapist. He describes it as him raping her, which is just how he sees it.
He's, like, framing it in his mind that way, and it's obviously, like, he is trying to regain this sense of power in this situation.
He just seems very lost. Like Yante's all about this hatred and
Yeah,
she's trying to bring Rohan down to his level and
yeah,
like he really believes that he has and he like
yeah,
throughout the book he talks about the reason he doesn't want to be a brutish king who goes around and murders and uses his power for different reasons. And throughout the book we haven't really talked about this as a theme, but he like talks about what he wants to bring peace because he doesn't want to rule by brutality. He doesn't want to be like a monster like Rolstra, and in this moment he's brought down to Rolstra's level. It's just a gross, awful scene.
yeah, it's just awful. I think also, like, she kind of has constructed this act to happen, like, she describes the dragon tapestries as violently erotic. She, like, laughs at the end and, like, stands over him proudly, like, while he's having sex with her the second time, he's, like, acknowledging that she's, like, victorious over him, and he's, like, unable to stop himself.
He's also still drugged and locked up in her bedroom.
He knows that the only way to get her to leave is to have sex with her again. He doesn't really have any power in this situation, and I think that, like, him having this violent reaction is not him consciously trying to take power back, but is him like trying to kind of reclaim some of that. This entire book, he's been emasculated over and over again. People are like, he's just a virgin, he doesn't know how to like have sex with a woman. Like, and then like once he is married to Shanad, he can't have a son. And they're like, oh, like they can't even have a child together. And then this is like his entire bodily autonomy has been taken away from him in this moment.
Multiple times he talks about how he only wants to be with Sinead. We didn't mention it, but
Yeah.
like there's a point earlier where Sinead's like, maybe you should just like, be with another woman.
Yeah,
So
get a
like
mistress and you can have an heir through her. And he's like, I don't want to do that. Yeah, he refuses to do that because he doesn't want to be with anyone else.
heartbreaking.
And then she leaves him and leaves him alone. And like for days after, he refuses to like eat anything because he's afraid it's drugged. And then we get to like the other weird part of the scene. Well, I guess it cuts away. It cuts away to Andrade back at the Goddess Keep, and she realizes that she's been surrounded by an army. And Pansala is able to devise a plan to get them out because she's like, well, I'll just pose as a princess. And because we've been surrounded, I'll just get us out that way. And she's able to sneak Andrade, Iraval, a bunch of other people, and Cheyana out using her princess status. But then she does double cross Andrade and escapes. And Chiana's like, I knew that she was going to do that. And she is so fucking annoying. I hate this character. Oh my God. She sucks.
Since we didn't mention it, Andrade is like Pansali used to be super annoying and bitchy, but then like she calmed down after being in Goddess Keep. And I thought she like wanted to be with us and join our team. And then like and all of a sudden she runs away and Andrade's like, oh, I was wrong about that. And you're like, I wonder who the real Pansala is. And you know,
Anyway, so that's that whole thing's happening. Sinead decides that she's gonna, like, rescue Rohan, so she goes
sends like everybody else out. So she sends like Wavelish out to fight
at
the
Togath,
Merida
yeah.
and then sends her brother and Che to where Rolster's rolled up. So like no one's around to like rescue Rowan.
I think she goes with Ospel, though, and Ospel, like, is no help. Where did he go?
Oswald, no, she goes by
She just goes
herself.
by herself. Oh, she does go by herself.
She's just like, I'm gonna go rescue him with my magic powers.
Even though I can't kill anybody or hurt anybody with my magic powers.
Yeah, she's like, I'm gonna kill him or not or whatever. And you're
And
like,
she's immediately captured. Immediately.
immediately.
Immediately. Like, we don't even see it happen. It happens off page. She, like it just, like Rohan's, like, in his bedroom refusing to eat and, like, is not sure how many days have passed. And then he hears a commotion. He looks out the window, and, like, a bunch of guards are holding her, and they've taken her rings off. And they're like, "We got her ring. She can't use her power." And Aeonte, like, comes out and she's like, "That's not true. She can still use her power." And she summons, like, a huge fire tornado. And then Aeonte's like, "If you do that, I'll kill him." And then she just like, "Okay, I surrender," and like dismisses the fire tornado. And that's like her entire rescue attempt, which is so bizarre. And then she's just thrown in a cell without any clothes and is this is another trigger warning. She is gang raped. Thankfully, this all happens off page. We hear about it.
It's literally one sentence in
Yeah.
the book, and I was like, I'm gonna pretend that I didn't read that because it's ambiguous. And then, like,
It's really ambiguous when she's thinking about it when she's in the cell. She it says, like, she wasn't sure how many days had passed or how many men, and I was like, "Oh, like,
yeah,
coming in to, like, give you food?"
I was like, oh, yeah, yeah,
And,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then, yeah, like, then Aeonte comes into her cell and is like, "I'm pregnant, so I'm gonna let you both go, and I'm gonna keep Rohan alive because he needs to vouch that my child is his when it's born." So it had to have been at least, like, a week or 2 because she had to, like, wait until
I knew in the first week, and then I waited a little bit longer.
okay, so it was, like, a week. And so, like, she sees Rohan for the first time, and he's, like he looks terrible, like, terrible.
He hasn't eaten.
He hasn't eaten in, like, a week, I guess. She says his, like, ribs are showing. He's still, like his wounds are still bleeding because they haven't really been treated properly, and he's, like she says his hair is greasy, which is kinda funny. Like, it's like, of all these more awful things, it's like, also his hair looks gross. And he's really, like, in a bad place, and he's like, "Don't touch me, I'm ruined," because he had sex with Aeonte, and he's basically saying, like, he thinks he's been defiled and that he's not worth her touching him, and then she snaps at him and is like, "Does that mean I'm ruined too?" I and she says, like, she can't remember how many men defiled her because she was
Yeah, she's like, they throw each other like their own sexual assaults back at each other. Whole
yeah,
scene's just
it's
horrible. And
horrible.
like,
And they leave, which, like, I guess that is, like, a realistic trauma response. The thing that this book does with a lot of different things is it has, like, this kind of balance, this, like, poetic balance thing where if one thing happens to one character, one thing it has to happen to another character, or if, like, one thing happens to a character once, it happens again. So, like okay, so the example with Palila is, like, she was plotting to steal a baby, so her baby was stolen from her, right? And she with Palila, she killed all of these mistresses, so she also was killed in a violent way. And with them, it's like, well, one of them was sexually assaulted, so the other one was sexually assaulted, so their traumas are linked. And like, I feel like it is realistic for Aeonte to be like, I'm going to make sure that you know that you can't get pregnant by having like this like violent act done to you multiple times, and like Ayanthi has sex with Rohan twice and is pregnant immediately, and Shaned is unfortunately assaulted over multiple days and does not get pregnant from this event. And I feel like it's the author kind of trying to showcase
I don't
how
know if I agree. I
unfertile.
just have to be honest. It's just like we already knew she was unfertile. Like they talk about the
Oh,
fact that she
I
gives
don't
birth
think
to sons,
hey,
like
I don't
like
think
it's a
it was
true thing.
necessary, and I wish it hadn't happened, and I don't think that the author should have done that. I think
I
this
don't
is
even
what
know
the
why
author was
Sinead
trying
is
to do.
went there.
I don't
Like,
either. Like,
literally,
she
like,
was
they
like the
released
weirdest plan. Like, she knew what, but the thing is, she knew what fucking window she could have climbed up to get to him. And she just like decided to like, yeah, I'm not sure. We don't know what her plan was, but it seemed like she didn't have one.
like, they just release him. Like, that was always the plan, was to kinda, like, let him
Yeah.
go. It's just it
Yeah.
nothing in Farouk makes
It
sense, and
doesn't.
it's horrible. It's,
Yeah.
like, the worst part about this book, and it's so bad that I think it made me hate this
It
book.
ruined the book for me. Yeah. Like, it just like, I have no words for like how awful this whole sequence was. Yeah, I just feel like it was the author being like, I really want these two people to experience the most traumatic thing that can really happen to a person over and over again. Why? Why did Sinead have to be a part of that? Like, she didn't. It didn't have to have happened to her at all. Like, listener, this is a hard line that JoJo and I both have with books where we really do not enjoy themes of sexual assault, especially when they happen on page graphically. It's something that we really do not like and do not like to read. And there are some books that approach it in a really delicate way and in a way that is really meaningful. And it's okay if like you don't have an issue with these kinds of themes in books. And it's okay if you as an individual like feel catharsis when you read these things in books. That is totally fine. And I think that there are books that approach these themes really delicately and meaningfully. Like I just read this book called The Bandit Queens, which is like a huge theme in the book is about abusive husbands. And it brings this up in a way that's really meaningful. But thankfully, nothing ever really happens on screen in that book. So it is possible for this to be a theme in a book. But this instance in this book, it was not, it was just awful, in our opinion.
And even for, like, Rohan, there's a son that's a part of it, and, like, that's important for the later book, and, like, him processing his rape is important for later in the book, and it shows up, but, like, it's just, like, not a part of, like, Sinead's story other than she really hates Ianthe, which she already hated Ianthe, and, like, she doesn't process it, and it's not really brought up.
You can hate someone for what they did to a person you loved. It doesn't have to be something that happens to you. Like, Ayante's violence against Rohan should have like, from, like, an authorial perspective, that and should have been enough for Sinead to been like, "This is enough, like, you do not deserve to live," for that act of violence. It didn't need like, again, like, the violence does not have to be done to you for you to swear vengeance on someone else, and this is falling into that trope where women can only exact vengeance against someone else if their personal bodily autonomy has been violated or their children were killed. Like, though, this is a huge trope in a lot of fantasy where women only become these vengeful people that take power into their own hands successfully when they themselves are sexually violated or their children are killed. It doesn't matter if their husband is killed. It doesn't matter if their sister is killed. It doesn't matter what happens to literally anyone else in their life. It has to be an act of sexual violence that happens to them. And then the only other thing that it could be is their children are killed. She doesn't have any children. So this is the only thing that could happen to her. And it's just like so frustrating that this trope exists. And it's so frustrating that it persisted in a book like this that it didn't have to be in. So
We should get back to the plot. I think we've
yeah.
grumbled enough about it.
Okay. They leave the keep, and while they're going home, they come upon two dragons who are doing like their mating duel. Does trigger a PTSD response in Rohan because he's having this like PTSD response based on like the tapestries that were in the bedroom, and he gets really turned on by it and he tries to have sex with Sinead really violently. He like grabs her and kisses her like really aggressively. And at first she like reciprocates and then she's like, no, I don't want to do this. And he slaps her really hard. And then he lets her go, thankfully. And she like walks away and sits down and he's just like loathing himself for what he's become. And you get the sense that he doesn't feel like he deserves to have like a tender experience again. He feels like a barbarian. He thinks he's a rapist. He's been brought like to the lowest point. He thinks he's no different than Rolstra. He was like trying to create this better world, like JoJo said, and Now the only way he can act is out of violence and out of fear and as a reaction, and he's like hates himself for it. And it's just a really hard scene.
And of course, we don't get Sinead's point of view at all.
We do a little bit, but she's just thinking that she's like her body is sore and she like is kind of afraid. And she it says that she's afraid of him
Yeah.
because she was afraid of his reaction. But it does seem like Sinead kind of represses what happened to her because we really don't get her processing it in the same way that Rohan is processing it for the rest of the book. Meanwhile, Rolstra, he is on the opposite side of the river that borders the desert as Che and Davi, and he is with Jostri, who's that young lord, which was Davi's lord, and he's having issues with him because Jostri wants to kind of jump into battle. He doesn't want to wait, and Rolstra's like, no, 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 we need to wait. While this is happening, Pansala makes her way to the camp, and she's like, you wanted a sunrunner, now you have one. And he's really excited by finally having a sunrunner back. So he accepts her back into his battlement. Then there are like a ton of battle sequences that kind of happen in summary. We get a lot of these as like a top-down view of battle, like we're seeing pieces move on a board instead of like people actually in battle. But when we do see the battles actually happen, they are really interesting. So Tobin, who has been sent to, she's at Stronghold, and she's like one of the only people at Stronghold. She's with like a contingent of archers, are there when the Merida come to try to take Stronghold.
It's a planned trap, by the way, that they like sent a lot of their forces out to like have Merida think that they're empty
Yeah.
so that they kept all the archers so they can like it's like a good tactical plan and it's a great fight scene.
We also get like a really good description of like the defenses where like she's Tobin apparently is a really talented archer. She like paints her arrows too. She paints them red and white, which is Chase colors, because she's like, I wanted them to know whose arrows these are. And she's standing at like an arrow loop, which is a hole in a castle wall that is wider on the inside, and then it funnels down to this really small slit, and it's usually angled downward. So the archer has this really defended position that they can shoot arrows from that is really difficult for archers that are attacking the castle to shoot into the hole, which is like castles have those. She also talks about like the runs underneath. So like once the Merida breach the outer walls, they have to go through this tunnel at the bottom of Stronghold, which they're basically just like in a shooting gallery where they can just shoot them from above. So it's like this really well defended castle. One of the archers does hit Tobin in the leg, and she's okay, but she is wounded.
Great scene where they like basically wait until they're all like even the back or within archery range to start shooting so they can't retreat because the back is hemming them in by being struck with arrows.
So actually something that's we should note is that this society does have a lot of like equal rights in a lot of things when it comes to gender. The military does seem like it has a lot of equality between the genders with who is in the military. So the general of Zahava's military is a woman.
There's so many names in this book. I'm so sorry. If you read it or have read it, you'll be like, yes, there are a lot of names and
Yeah.
not all of them are important.
No. But we also like in the scene, like her sons are the younger set of sons. They're like really little. They're like 6. So they can't fight, they want to, but they're sent to run arrows, which is something that would have been done during a siege too, where young children would have been used. They wouldn't have just been put away in a room and locked in there. They would have been helping out as support. But while this battle is happening, that is when Sinead and Rohan are able to get back into Stronghold, and they come back in through this like secret exit. And the Merida have breached into the courtyard, and they're able to kind of join the fight. Sinead summons this huge fireball, and
Lights a bunch of them on fire.
but she extinguishes it before she can kill them. It does like seem to disorient them enough that then they're able to like really just defeat the Merida kind of immediately after that.
It's so weird because they're like, yeah, you didn't use fire to kill, you just like really maimed them, and then, but we're gonna kill a bunch of. It's this like weird line where they're like, you can't kill when you're actively in battle against like a foe that is actively trying to kill you.
Yeah, it's bizarre. Yeah, the thing it's kind of funny because like as Rohan and Sinead enter into this fray, the first thing Rohan sees is the red and white painted arrows, and he's like, "Why is Tobin here?" I just thought that was kind of a funny little moment. Yeah, so they kill all the Merida but 10, and then they tell them that they have to cut off the right hands of all the dead ones, and then they put them out each like, put the hands in the bags, and then they're like, "Go hand these to our enemies," and then they send them to hand them to their enemies.
Oh, I wasn't sure if it was living hands or dead hands. 'Cause he's like, "I'm
Oh,
such a brute." I thought
I
they
mean,
were, like,
maiming a dead person is still kinda brutish.
more brutish to maim a live person, just saying.
Yeah, more, but it's still brutish to, like, maim a dead body.
Either way, some living or dead, hands get cut off, and Rohan is like, "I'm a monster for doing such dark
And
things."
then he leaves to join Che. Andrade and Yuraval are kind of stuck in River Run. They've been surrounded by the enemy army, except on the river because there's like a river on one side of River Run. And they're able to like eventually, I'm just going to say this now so we don't have to get back to it. Eventually, they're able to like use the Sunrunners who are speaking to each other to get the guy who was on the Prince of the Island to send his ships, and then the ships are able to dock and they're able to get the army to crawl into River Run without the surrounding army realizing it, and then they're able to successfully defeat the army that way.
Do you think that's a really cool scene, listener? Because I do too, and we found out, like, after the fact.
Yeah.
Throughout this book, they're so good at when, Sinead was, like, grabbed by Rolstra, we have, like, Rolstra planning it, and then we have Ianthe, like, leading her away, and then we cut to Palala, who's like, "Oh, he's gonna, like, drug and rape her," and then, like, "Go send a message," and then we get the message, and then we have Rohan rushing to save her, and we don't know if it's in time, and then we reveal it, and it's, like, this great buildup, and then, like,
Yeah.
in this section of the book, there's
Yeah.
so many scenes where they're like, "By the way,
This happened.
it's actually all good because we figured it out
I
earlier."
kind of think that the book was supposed to be like 200 pages longer, and the editor was like, no, you need to cut this down.
But why didn't they cut down the scene of them shopping?
Good point. I don't know. I'm not the editor. We also hear in summary that Walvis was able to successfully defend Tilgath from the invading force. And like we hear about like they were undermining the wall. Like it's obvious that Melanie Rawn really understands battle strategy from like the Middle Ages, because the reason that we have the word undermine is from this battle, this siege strategy where the invading army would tunnel underneath a castle wall and then collapse the tunnel so that the wall above it would collapse. And then they'd have this point of entry into the defenses. And that happens at Tilgath off screen. And yet Walvis is able to successfully defend this castle. And they even have this thing where they're like, we're going to leave that wall down. We're not going to rebuild it because we want it as a reminder that we, even with our wall breached, we were still able to defend it successfully, which
Yeah, like, Rowan spends the next rest of the book being like, "Oh, I don't know if I can live up to my high aspirations that I held for 2/3 of the book because I have PTSD. Maybe I'm a monster and a brute now," and, like, this is actually one of the things that he, like, holds on to as, like, "Maybe I can be a just prince." So it's, like, an
yeah.
important scene, but literally it's just a paragraph, and it would have been so cool to have it on screen.
It would have been cool to see it. That's what I mean. Like, I love all the battle strategy and I love all, like the absolute knowledge. Like she even talks about like in the final battle between we haven't gotten here yet, but the final battle between Rohan and Rolstra where they're dueling, she talks about his sword has nicks in it from him fighting with it all day. So when he like it catches on Rolstra's pant leg and it gets stuck. Which is something that happens that never is talked about, but it like talks about it in this book. And like, that's really cool, and I wish we got more of that.
The author is good at writing fight scenes, and so much stuff happens in summary. It's just so frustrating.
Yeah, so while all of what we're explaining is happening, Sinead is hiding at the stronghold with Tobin because basically what they're trying to do, they're waiting for Ianthe to give birth, and then Sinead is like,
Sinead's gonna steal that baby.
"Steal the baby and pass it off as my own," and because no one has seen me in 9 months, they're gonna think that I've been pregnant this whole time. And while they're waiting, they receive a message, likely from Pansala, but they don't know who it's from because they don't recognize her colors, saying that Jostri has all these weaknesses, which they then relay to Che. And Che and Rohan use them to entice Jostri into battle, where they are able to successfully kill him. Che brings the rings, Jostri's rings, to Rohan, and then they're kind of debating about whether to burn the bridges because they don't want Rolstra to cross. but Markin, who is also a Faraday, uses his Faraday powers to burn the bridges before they're able to finish debating whether or not to do it.
Yeah, there's another scene where like Markin, who's Che's
Son.
son, who like also has Sunrunner powers and is maybe gonna be a Faraday prince, which is like a thing that they've sort of been talking about. They're not sure if it's good or not, but like here it is.
Yeah.
Yap, 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 yap. And he's like, I'm gonna burn the bridge. And then Che's like, no, you might kill someone with your Sunrunner powers, which is the thing that's important. And Markin's like, yeah, but like it's better than if you like.
Yeah, I might kill one person, but if you don't do this, a lot of people will die. And then he burns the bridge and he's like, "Well, I didn't kill anybody."
It's so stupid.
Oh, and then after this happens, like after they win this battle and after he burns the bridges, a bunch of dragons fly overhead and everyone starts chanting, "Dragon Prince, Dragon Prince, Dragon Prince," which is the title of the book.
They're like, oh, there's dragons. It's a sign.
We also learned that like a bunch of yearling dragons take out Rolstra's cavalry because they accidentally camped on this feeding ground that the yearling dragons had. So they started like eating all the horses and attacking all the people. And he lost like a ton of his army that way. Like it was like 400 people or something.
It's so random too. And it's also like maybe Pansala's like, you should go around to fork them. Fork them? You know what I mean.
Poor them.
Flank them. Thank you. Yeah, to fork them. And then Pansala's like, I didn't tell you to like camp in a dragon feeding ground.
Yeah, it might have been her.
It might have been her.
And so, but people also are like, Rohan's able to control the dragons, even though he had like nothing to do with any of this, but he's like allowing them to believe this. But we also hear about the dragons attacking it through like basically Andrede is like reading the newspaper one morning. And when I say that, I mean she's like traveling around looking at and seeing what's happening. She's looking at the news and she sees this with her Sunrunner ability and she just starts laughing. And she's like, Irabal, you have to see this. It's like so random. Yeah. Anyway, Ianthe gives birth a little bit early, and Sinead, who's like been monitoring, is like, "All right, Tobin, it's time." So she, Tobin, and Osvel sneak into the castle.
So now she finally talks to the general lady, and the general lady's like, "Oh, there's a secret entrance." And it's like, "Where were you last time?"
Yeah, why didn't she consult anybody? Like, it had to be written down somewhere, right? They had a huge library in the basement of Stronghold.
So she sneaks out of Stronghold, from what I remember, based on the general telling her there's a secret exit because like she's a general and she knows all of this stuff. And then later
Yeah.
she's like, "Oh, there's also a secret entrance to Farouk." And we're like, "What? Where was this? Earlier?"
Yeah, anyway, even though they sneak in, she lights like a ton of buildings on fire.
They like see a guard and the guard's like, "I recognize you."
No,
And she's like,
she says, "I recognize you," because he's implying that he's one of the people who assaulted her.
yeah, and she goes to try to kill him. Oswald murders him instead.
Yeah, and she lights like a bunch of buildings on fire and everyone's like, "Eh," and they leave. But Ayanthe, because she literally just gave birth, is too weak to leave and she's trapped in her bedroom, which is the dragon bedroom. So they confront her and like she kind of taunts them. Sinead's like, "I'm gonna steal your baby
And kill you.
and kill you." And she's like, "Fine, do it." And then Oswald kills her before Sinead can kill her.
It's yeah, the two people in a row. Sinead is like, "I'm gonna kill you," and Oswey is like, "Nah, I got it. You don't want to bloody your Sunrunner hands because you'll never forgive yourself, but I can murder." And it's just like, dude, what are you doing? Let a girl murder.
Yeah, and she's like mad at Oswald because she's like, "That was my kill. You stole that kill from me." And then they leave with the baby. And they like ask like as if she hasn't killed people because she set like the entire keep on fire. But they do ask. They're like, "So was anyone killed?" While they're like leaving and they're like, "I don't think so. I think everyone left." And they're like, "Okay, cool." And it's like, of course that guy wouldn't know. He also fled.
Just the Anthe and the princes, and then we find out later that like the princes also escape. So like they brought horses and they get stolen on the way out. So they have to walk again back.
All the way to Skyball. That's where they go. Yeah. Through the desert with a baby that they can't feed because they don't have any milk for it. I don't know how this baby survived, but it did.
It's not too far. It's like a day's drive. Like she just gave birth and like they're there within like a couple of hours. So it's like not a long drive.
Anyway, it's a weird scene. They do leave with the baby. She does get burned, but like in a different way from her visions. So she's like, the visions aren't set in stone.
It's like an important reminder that like the visions aren't set in stone and that like she brought this about. This wouldn't have necessarily happened if she had done things differently, which is, like, interesting because she is complicit in what happened.
Yeah, she can't, like, say it was just fate. She also, like I didn't mention this, but when Aeonte, like, took her all of her rings, she specifically was like, "Ha, this emerald ring is mine now because he did have me." So she takes that ring back. She leaves all the other rings, but she takes that one back, and that's, like, the only one she's wearing now. So she's kind of I feel like that symbolically is supposed to mean that she has relinquished her Sunrunner allegiance and is now aligning herself with Rohan completely.
Exactly what it is, that she's, like, she's decided that she's a princess, not a sunrunner, which is, like, kind of like a thing she was working through with
Yeah.
the whole book and would've and if she had, like, killed someone in the name of the princedom, which she tries to do multiple times, it would have been, like, her solidifying that, but
Yeah.
people could just wouldn't let her kill anyone.
I'll let her kill this girl. So they get to Skyball and she starts the final battle is happening between Rohan and Rolstra. Rohan's shoulder is wounded like a third time. His shoulder like is wounded like every second of this book.
Like, it's actually wounded.
He gets stabbed.
He has a lot of trouble using it. It's not like a gunshot in an action movie where it's just like you can
Yeah.
take a couple of shots up there and you're, like, still running around, you know?
He's having trouble, like, lifting his sword. He is told like, he meets up with Andrade, and she tells him that Rolstra has fled to the south, so then they all are pursuing Rolstra. While this is happening, Sinead is, like, kinda creeping me out. She's like, "He's my son. He's my son," you know, she's like but they go to Skyball, and she, like, lays the baby down, boop, and she, performs the naming ritual, which is a thing that I guess happens. So she's like, "Grandson of my father," you know, or whatever.
It's a good scene. The magic is worked throughout, and it's, like, a way of understanding the world, and you see a lot of the elements that have been, like, mentioned and
Yeah.
used before in the
And she,
scene.
like but she also, like, names everyone, she's like, "Grandson of Milar, grandson of Zahava," and she, like, you know, she's like, "I shall name you Paul."
Oh, like Paul, I get it,
Which is like
'cause
Paul
it's Dune.
Atreides from
It's
Dune.
Dune. It's Dune. To be fair, I finished this book yesterday, so
I was like, "What?" 'Cause I was like, "This huge buildup, and you think it's gonna be this cool ass name," because everyone in this book has this cool ass fantasy name, and his name is just Paul. Now, it's not spelled like Paul, it's Pol, but it's basically Paul, which is not like a fantasy name. I know that Sinead is like a real name in this earth, and like Aeonte is also a real name on this earth, but like Paul. Anyway, she names him Paul. And then she weaves Starlight, which is supposed to be impossible, but she weaves Starlight and she like pulls from Tobin's power. She pulls from baby Paul's power. And she weaves Starlight and she looks at what's happening with this final duel that's happening between Rohan and Rostra. And they're like stripping off their clothes because Rohan has to be shirtless all the time. And they start dueling with each other to decide the battle. This is a thing that actually did happen where two people would fight to determine the outcome of a battle. So they're fighting and then like someone tries to throw a dagger and Sinead sees it. So she like pulls from Andrade's power and Uravol's power and then the secret other person's power, which is Pansala's power. And she weaves this dome of living flame from their power and the starlight to protect them while they're fighting. And they are fighting. It's a really gritty fight. They like it's a good fight. They don't talk very much to each other also, which I like in a fight. It's just described yeah, like Rolster like taunts him and he's like, "I'm gonna make your son kneel," basically. At one point, Rohan like drops to his knees and it's from his perspective and he can't lift his arm anymore. So he's having to force his one hand closed around his sword with his other hand. And he trips and he's on his knees and Rolster's like, "That's a good position for you. You should have taken that a long time ago." And then like they're fighting with knives because Rolster's also really exhausted and older. And eventually Rohan is able to kind of trick him by he gets on his knees like he is about to kneel and then he jumps up and stabs Rolstra under the chin. And then they both collapse because they're exhausted. Well, Rolster's dead, but Rohan's exhausted. And and then the force field dissipates and it's a really good fight. um and then dragons fly overhead. And everyone's like, "Dragon
'cause
Prince,
that's the title of the
Dragon
book, The Dragon.
Prince." And then Andrade's like, "Whoa, what was that?" And Andrade also, like, realizes, like, Pole's presence, and she's like, "I did get my Sunrunner prince like I wanted from the beginning." But, like, she would have gotten that anyway, apparently, because, like, Markin.
It's like everyone's popping up Sunrunner princes and princesses. It's
Yeah.
uh,
And then the scene ends, and so the next scene, they are all back in Stronghold, and Rohan is crowned High Prince. They're, like, presenting the baby to everyone for the first time, and, a bunch of people are like, "Oh, he has your eyes, Sinead." And Sinead's like, "Thank you, he does."
it's described that Ianthe has green eyes, that Sinead's eyes are like emerald, hers are like dead leaves or whatever.
Yeah, I think they're described differently earlier in the book. Like, they're described as just, like, darker, but then after when she commits that act of violence against Rohan, he, in his perspective, describes her eyes as the color of dead leaves, which is an interesting change in the way that he's seen what she looks like. Which, like, this author is really good with prose, and, like, the way she describes things is really, really good as a way of, like, telling us how the characters are feeling in a specific instance. But anyway, he, like, gives out a bunch of titles because so many people have died. He also, like, so Walvis, for example, is now the leader of Tilgath, or maybe Skybolt, it doesn't matter. Pansala is also.
He becomes Skybull, yeah, where all the gold is because he can trust
Oh,
him.
yeah, and, like, because the ruler of Skybolt was killed in that attack. Pansala is also given regency over Prince March. Yeah, Andrade is pissed by that. She's like, "What?" And even Pansala is like, "I know you still don't trust me, even though, like, I betrayed my father for you, like, multiple times."
Like the only reason you won this battle is because fed you information the whole time. I like Pensala.
Yeah, I do too. She's an interesting character. So she is now the regent of Prince March, and she can, like, I think Rohan said something about, like, even if she marries or something, she'll be the regent, and she, like, doesn't have to marry.
Yeah, she basically gets to rule over her land for as long as she wants until his son is old enough to like take it. Basically, everybody like Devi gets to take over as prince of the land that he like betrays. The princes that we didn't mention that were squabbling are like cool now. Peace has come to the land and everyone's happy and everyone has got their just desserts.
Yeah, which is, like, what Rohan wanted. He says, like, right before the final battle, like, "This is the final time I, like, lift my sword. After this, may my sword rust." And then, like, Chase says, "And mine along with yours." So they are, like, swearing off violence. I wonder if there's gonna be violence in the second book, JoJo.
I'm not
I mean,
gonna
I'm not
find
gonna read
out.
it either, but, I bet there's going to be.
There's a lot of stuff about the stolen baby where they're like everyone's like, "Do you think stealing this baby is gonna come out to bite you in the ass, Sinead?" And she's like, "That's a future problem."
She's like, "It's mine. What are you talking about?" Anyway, they crown him High Prince, and then the book ends with Rohan and Sinead, like, feeding Pole. She was, like, given this special kind of herb so that she can breastfeed. So she breastfeeds him, and they put him to bed. And this whole book, after this happens, Rohan's kind of like, "I don't know if I can love this child, but Sinead wants to love it, so I guess I will." And in this last scene, he is accepting that he will love this child as if it were hers.
It's just really frustrating because we don't really we see Rohan and Sinead leaving Ianthe's castle, and then they aren't together for the rest of the book until this scene, and it's just like, "Oh, yeah, when Rohan came back, he was kinda shitty and they, like, weren't getting along, but then Paul was so cute and beautiful and everything we wanted, so, like, we found our way back to each other. We found the capital F fire between us, and everything's good now," and it's just
It's
like
like, she says to him, because he sits in the bed with her, and she says, "There's fire to rekindle here between us," and he's like, "The fire never went out." But, like, obviously, like, you were having some issues, and it was, like, because of the trauma you received, and you were processing it, but she's right, like, there is intimacy to rekindle between the 2 of them, and trust. Just because, like, the love is there doesn't mean, like, the intimacy and trust doesn't need to be rebuilt.
there's just no co they don't figure it out. They, like, don't
That's how the book ends. And I think, and this leads us into something that I kind of wanted to talk about, because I think one of the weakest parts of the book, in a book that, like, generally was really good with relationships between characters, the weakest part of the book was the relationship between Sinead and Rohan.
they're just magically in love with each other, and that's it.
It's insta love is the trope. Like, they instantly fall in love with each other and are committed to each other, and it's these separate forces that are forcing them apart, and we never really see that we aren't able to see the buildup of the relationship because there is no buildup of a relationship. And then even when they are ripped apart by these outside forces, we don't see the buildup of the relationship that happens a second time because it happens off screen and we don't see it other than in summary that's like a paragraph long.
mean, in some ways, we like know that they're good together, but like that's not part of their relationship. That's like outside of it. Sinead spends a lot of time worried about how much she loves him, and Rohan doesn't want to do anything without her. But like,
Why? Why do they suddenly feel this way? This is actually something, so I think that this author is really good at writing established relationships, but is not good
mhm.
at writing new budding relationships, which is kind of the opposite of a lot of authors we see. And this happens in TV shows a lot too, where writers don't really know how to write a committed, strong relationship, but they're really good at writing like that drama and the oh will they won't they kind of thing that happens in relationships when they're just starting out, but they just do not know how to write a committed relationship. And this author is the opposite. All the committed relationships are written really interestingly, even the bad ones, like with Palila and Rolstra. That's an interesting relationship and it's well done, even though it's frightening and it's abusive. But like Che and Tobin are a fantastic couple. They no drama between those two. They love each other. They're great. They're stable.
Know why they like each other because we see multiple times of them interacting and bouncing off each other and
Yeah.
playing off of each other and having like small scenes with their
Yeah.
kids together.
That is I don't know. I think that that was just, like, one of the weakest parts of the book, was that relationship, which is sad because it's, like, such a structural part of the book. I do kind of want to talk about the use of gender roles in the book because I do think that Tobin and Che were kind of built up as this, like, ideal couple in the book, like, they are what others are striving to look like. Che is seen as this ideal masculine presence where he has a wife who only is giving him sons and twin sons constantly, like 2 sets. And he is in this very sexual relationship with her. He's a very strong warrior. He's very wealthy. He's like fiscally really powerful because of his horse breeding enterprise that he has. So he just feels like he's this really and like Zehava even establishes him right in the beginning as like this ideal masculine figure. And then Tobin is seen as this like ideal feminine figure. She's married, she is fertile, she really loves her husband. She has a very successful sexual relationship and romantic relationship with her husband where they are in this really equal match and they are able to use each other's strengths to aid each other in every aspect of their lives. And that's placed in contrast to the other male characters in this book, specifically Rohan. And I mentioned before, like, how his kind of masculinity had been used against him for the entire book. And then it kind of came to a head with that scene with Aanthe. But also, Rolstra, his masculinity is placed into doubt multiple times because he's only able to have daughters. And no character is immune to like perpetuating this idea of specific gender roles because later in the book when they're looking at the dragons at Sky Bowl, one of the characters mentions that the dragons like eat this specific weed to help them like with the mating thing. So it's basically like Viagra for these dragons. And Rohan makes a joke that he should send some to Rolstra. So he is also like a part of this thing, this like cultural idea of what masculinity is, even though he is also definitely, abused by it as well. So it's just this really interesting look into gender roles. And we, as the reader, are understand that these are not none there is no one like the book is very clear in showing us there's not one correct way to express gender and there's not an incorrect way to express gender, but in world the characters have been socialized to believe that there is a specific way and are specific ways to express and show your masculinity. And that is also true with femininity as well, where Tobin is this ideal woman where she wants to be a mother, but she's also the strong ruler. Where Palila hates being a mother, she hates getting pregnant. And that is like a source of anxiety for her. She does not like doing this.
Because it affects her looks, so
Yeah.
it's also like she's selfish in this way because she's like too more worried about her looks than like
Yeah, but in that same instance, she knows that her looks are the only thing that give her any kind of power with Royalstra, and when she is pregnant, Royalstra doesn't even wanna touch her or look at her. He hates that she's in the room with him when she's pregnant.
There's a lot of flexibility in this book about the way you can express
Mhm.
your gender. There's very feminine women and there's more masculine women, and they're both given power and ability to work. So there's no one way to be a woman. And we see that with Rowan and the other men, that there's like multiple ways to
Yeah.
be a man. But women rule at the end of this book, but you can't own it, you know? Women can be leaders, but they can't own land. And like Rohan talks about how the notion of a son, and when Ianthe promises him a son specifically, not a child, like
Mhm.
a son, that holds so much power over
Yeah.
him. And it's still like this very specific gender thing, even though there's like such large depictions of gender. It's just really interesting. Still just like such a rigid gender hierarchy within the laws, and like no one is like, hey, maybe we should let women inherit like that. No, they're just like, well, like she can rule, but like
Well, I mean, baby steps in this feudal medieval society, I think, is, like, what we have to
yeah, yeah,
expect. I
yeah.
feel like it would be kinda like record scratch, modern feminists coming in, telling like, restructuring society so women can then rule. Might be, like, too far. I mean, hopefully that happens in other books, but, like but I think that we have this kind of conflict within Rohan where he's like, "My wife is really powerful in her own right," but the vassals do not see that. They see her power as being able to create a son and an heir for me, which is like another way that like we have this dichotomy between Sinead's inability to have a child compared to Ianthe's fertility, where her having children with multiple men, like she's never called like a whore for that. They're just like, oh, she's really fertile and she's only having sons. And Sinead's envy of that, she always is like, I really like hate that she's able to do this and I'm not. Yeah, we have the dichotomy between Millar and Andrade too, where Millar is really focused on being a mother, and Andrade is like, well, she's stupid for that, even though Millar is obviously not stupid. We've established that she's actually quite intelligent. But Andrade also like internalizes this self-loathing because she's like, well, Millar is pretty and I'm not. When everyone else describes Andrade as like really being very stately, being very put together, I don't know that anyone describes her as beautiful, but like they describe her in these really positive physical terms for her.
Dronde, like, at the end is like, maybe it is nice to be, like, owned by someone and own other people, so, like, whole arc is confusing. At the end, she's like, "Maybe I should date," or whatever.
I think there's a lot of conversation surrounding gender in this book that I found really intriguing and interesting and, like, subtly placed in a way that we haven't seen yet in any of the books that we've read.
Right, we're going long.
Well, we should talk about the dragons.
Yeah, I very excited. Every dragon's a new dragon. These are, like, pure animal dragons. Thought they were kind of weird. I liked that they figured out a way to incorporate gold, even though it kind of
They're, like, farming them for gold, kind of.
like I said, it's interesting to incorporate the horde in such a way, but also it's always weird when you give someone like infinite money in a book. It's like, okay, now they can just buy everyone and everything, and they'll be
As
fine.
long as the dragon population remains, and as long as they remain like, they keep nesting there. Another thing with the dragons that I really liked in this book was that I do wish there were more dragons because they're kind of something that, like, exists around the main characters,
They disappeared for a large chunk of the book, and then like really showed up a bunch at the end.
but the dragons, like, are permeating, like, all the aspects of this culture, like, they have like, they say dragon shit instead of bullshit. Whenever they describe a cloak billowing, they're like, "It billowed like dragon wings." They have superstitions surrounding dragons where, like, one character is like, "Oh, a dragon calls before dawn. It means a death before dawn." Dragons are such a large part of this culture, so they, like, permeate through it even when they're not talking actually about dragons. They're using dragons like as a metaphor or and I really thought that made them feel really a part of the culture in a way that I think that some of the other books haven't really done.
Cool descriptions of dragons. There's just a bunch of cool descriptions of dragons, like baby dragons, lady dragons, flying dragons, walking dragons, fighting
And they're
dragons.
used as symbolism in the book, both throughout the book as like we the readers can see the symbolism, and then the characters in the book symbolize them. Like dragons are a symbol of freedom for Rohan specifically. So when they're then used during his capture in the bedroom, it's his freedom being used, like his idea of freedom being turned against him, which so there's this like symbolism there. And then they come to represent him like independently. People start calling him the Dragon Prince, which is him kind of regaining that power after he's brought low. I saw him killing the dragon in the very beginning of the book when he first is starting to rise to power as a way of framing the book, and then him killing Rostra at the end of the book. I felt like that was like bookending in a way where he wrote where those two fights had a lot of similarities to them. Where him killing the dragon was him submitting to this cultural standard of how to exist because he didn't want to do it, but he had to show the other vassals and lords that he was capable of ruling. So he was integrating into the society in this way. And then him killing Ralstra was him saying that he was willing to upend the way that things worked in the society. So dragons were used in like multiple ways in this book, even though they themselves were animals and weren't this like omnipotent presence or this intelligent creature. They were, I don't know, they were really interesting the way that they were used.
No, I agree completely. I don't have anything to add. How about we kind of like start with what we like and then end with what we didn't like. Why don't we end with what we like and then we can like talk about whether or not we would recommend this book? Because I've come up with a conclusion now after like talking about this book for 3 hours.
Okay, I mean, I think everything I just said I really liked. I really liked the way that gender roles were expressed for the most part. I really liked the way that dragons were used. I loved the world building. You really felt a sense of place, and every place that you were in, everywhere felt really real. You felt the sense of space. She really could construct a scene. There's like this part in the book, it's so small, where like they are coming up when Rolstra has fallen back. They come up over this ridge of a hill and they start smelling, and they're like, "Do you smell that?" And they're like, "It's salt." And they realize that he salted this entire field and destroyed this entire farmland. And the way that that scene is constructed is like so dramatic and amazing. It feel like you're like, oh, he salted the field. No, where I feel like if a lesser writer had written that, it'd be like, okay, yeah, like we get it. He salted the fields. So she really has this talent for constructing a scene.
I really love her prose. I think it's beautiful. I think the way she constructs a scene. I think her plotting is really where I've really struggled with this. Like literally like a whole battle scene that's like super
Yeah.
important to the plot. Like they're fighting on two wars and they don't know how to do it. And then like actually no, they're fine because they finished the battle and the whole thing is described in a paragraph. And it's so frustrating because we just saw this gorgeous scene of Tobin and the archers and then like Sinead and Rowan coming up. Look, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know I am just always looking for a good fight scene on page. Please give me fight scenes on page. I don't want to read about a cool fight scene that happened off screen. I don't want people talking about it. I want you to fight on the page and I want to see it.
Yeah.
And I like when that happened in this book, it's so good. But it's like half of the fight scenes are just like, and then that
Yeah,
happened.
I think it bothered you more than it bothered me. I was just so happy that we had accurate siege warfare and like battle strategy that I was like, they actually are using the landscape to their advantage.
Listeners, if you wonder the difference between the two of us, there it is. I want to see fight scenes. Joe wants an accurate
Yeah,
depiction of siege warfare on screen or not.
siege warfare and also just any kind of battle strategy. Okay, would you recommend this book?
So I thought long and hard about this, and I think everyone should read the first two sections of this book and then set the book on fire. And I think that's the right choice.
Ooh, so you are saying that you agree with book burnings?
Yes, 100%. As long as you pay for the book and then read most of it and then burn it. I just think the writing is like so
Mhm.
very good. And just like, I'm just the plotting in the third section is so confusing and weird. Just so like, I think it's just the writing's really lovely and good. And I just don't think you need to read the last chapter.
She has other books and other series, so who knows? I have heard that this is a complaint I've heard in multiple places that she is really, really good at constructing a narrative for the first 2 books and really bad at finishing a trilogy. And the last book in like multiple trilogies of hers are very frustrating for readers.
This book itself herself was like that we spent so much time with everyone personally moving through space, and then in the last like third, she's like, "All right, there's a plague, there's a war, we got stuff to do." It's just like this is too much. It should have been its own book.
Yeah, why was it like, why did there even have to be a plague?
It, just,
There didn't.
it was to shake up the political whatever, but why?
Yeah. So whether or not I would recommend this book, I would say that if you as a reader do not have trouble with graphic depictions of sexual assault on screen, if you're like, yeah, I can deal with it, then I think that this is a worthwhile book to read. But if you have trouble with it, if it's something that you find distressing or disturbing, I would not read this. Don't do it to yourself. Read something else instead because yikes. It was it was the most disturbing scene like that I've read in a really long time. I would say that just with that caveat.
Yeah, so either
Oh yeah.
read the book if you don't think it'll bother you, or do my approach, read two-thirds of the book, and then go on your merry way, happy in the knowledge that everybody got buried and ended fine.
Give it to a used bookstore.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just in a used bookstore and I saw a copy of it. And I was like, huh, interesting. Well, that was yeah, that was the book. Would you like to do the outro?
Yeah, I love how every time we're like, "And we're done." So this has been Dragon Prince by Melanie Rawn.
What are we reading next, JoJo?
We have decided to read a book that someone's actually heard of before, and we are reading Aragon by Christopher Paolini.
I don't know how to pronounce Paolini.
We are so sorry, Christopher, if we have mispronounced your name.
Hey, I get it. As someone who has had their name mispronounced many times, we'll have it right when we record Aragon. And the reason we are picking this is in part because this is a book that people have actually heard of. I think, like, even though it was written in like 2002, I think it's a book that a lot of people see as a seminal text in the dragon genre. It's a book that also rekindled people's love of dragons, like, because it was so popular in that time period when it was coming out. And I really want to read it again because it was a really important book to me as a teenager in middle school when I read it, and I would love to read it again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Aragorn is definitely part of the reason why this series is happening, and we've been sort of biding our time, but now we're finally gonna do it.
I can't wait to read about Saphira. I loved her when I was a kid. That's all we have today. Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a like and hit the subscribe button.
What were your thoughts on Dragon Prince if you read it or read two-thirds of it and then burned the book like I suggested?
You don't have to burn the book. You could give it to a library.
Sure. Would you recommend this book to others? Let us know in the comments and tell us what other dragon books you'd like us to read.
Bye.
Bye.